Chapter 1: The Azure Tomb. The winch motor screamed, a high-pitched metallic protest against the immense weight and the biting cold. Thick braided cable spooled unevenly onto the drum, slick with condensation that froze almost instantly upon contact with the frigid air. Below, in the yawning maw of the glacier's throat, helmet lamps cut cones of harsh white light through the swirling ice fog generated by their own heat and breath. The descent cage, a rattling steel platform barely large enough for 4 people and their essential gear, shuddered downward into the blue-tinged darkness. Kaylin Sharma braced herself against the vibrating mesh wall, her gloved hands double-checking the seals on her thermal suit. Beside her, Ben Carter stood rigid, his gaze fixed on the depth indicator mounted near the winch controls inside the cage. His breath plumed out in thick clouds, momentarily obscuring the glowing numerals. He was a block of contained tension, his usual military stillness amplified by the precarious environment. Depth, Key's voice was slightly muffled by her integrated mask respirator. 120 meters, Ben reported, his tone clipped professional. Pressure stable, air quality nominal within the cage, external readings, cold. He offered a slight shrug, a minimal gesture lost in the bulk of his gear. Below them, the sheer ice walls, carved by millennia of glacial pressure, and now being rapidly exposed by accelerating melt, reflected their lamps with an unnerving, deep sapphire glow. Water trickled down in countless rivulets, freezing partway into delicate, icicle-like formations before the flow found new paths. The sound was a constant, subtle chorus of drips and hisses, underscored by the deeper groans of the ice mass adjusting around them. It was the sound of something ancient and enormous shifting in its sleep, or perhaps its death throes. 2 other figures shared the cramped space. Dr. Aris Thorne, the expedition's lead glaciologist, practically vibrated with excitement, his helmet lamp sweeping erratic paths across the ice walls as if trying to absorb every detail simultaneously. Opposite him, Lena Petrova, the microbiologist, was more contained, reviewing data on a ruggedized tablet clutched in her mittened hands. The cage slowed, its descent becoming less jarring. Approaching target depth, Ben announced. Platform 1 access tunnel should be there. He pointed a thick glove towards a section of the ice wall where a darker opening became visible, marked bilocator beacons drilled into the ice earlier by the advanced probe team. A narrow, temporary metal walkway extended from the opening towards their descent path. With a final protesting screech from the winch and a hydraulic hiss, the cage locked into position level with the walkway. The air outside the cage seemed even colder, carrying a sharper bite and the mineral tang of ancient ice. Ben operated the cage door mechanism, a heavy grating sliding sideways with effort. Thorne, Petrova, you're out. Secure tethers before stepping onto the walkway. Sharma, stay close behind them. I'll follow and secure the cage access. Thorne needed no second instruction. He clipped his safety tether to the guide wire running along the walkway and scrambled out, his boots clanging on the metal grating. Magnificent, absolutely magnificent, his voice echoed slightly in the tunnel entrance. The clarity, unprecedented. Lena followed, moving with more deliberate care, her eyes scanning the ice around the tunnel mouth before she stepped fully onto the walkway. Key unclipped her own tether from the cage railing and secured it to the guide wire, the cold metal carabiner clicking loudly in the relative quiet. She stepped out, her boots finding purchase on the ridged metal surface. The sheer scale of the cavern opening above, lost in the rising fog and darkness, pressed down. The tunnel before them was not natural. It had been carved by the team's thermal lance, a smooth bored tube leading deeper into the glacier's heart. Portable lighting strips, already installed, cast a clinical white glare along its length. Key paused, waiting for Ben. He emerged from the cage, pulled the heavy door shut, and engaged the external locks. He moved with practiced efficiency, his movements economical despite the bulky suit. He clipped his own tether and gave a curt nod. Move in. Maintain 5-meter spacing. Comms check every 50 meters. Thorn, moderate your pace. Thorn was already 20 meters down the tunnel, his lamp beam dancing ahead. Aris, wait up, Lena called, her voice tighter than before. They proceeded into the ice tunnel. The air inside was still, devoid of the faint breeze present in the main shaft. The only sounds were their breathing, the crunch of their insulated boots on the thin layer of refrozen meltwater coating the floor, and the persistent, faint dripping from the ceiling. The walls were smooth here, almost polished by the thermal lance, but fractures spiderwebbed across the surface, evidence of the immense pressures surrounding them. Light penetrated the ice, giving the tunnel an ethereal, submarine quality. 50 meters, Ben's voice crackled over the internal comms. Status. Petrova, nominal, Lena responded. Sharma, nominal. Key kept her eyes scanning the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Part of her training, part automatic vigilance. Thorn, exceptional, came the breathless reply. The stratification layers are textbook, but the density seems higher than projected. Acknowledged, keep moving. Ben's voice remained level. They walked for another 10 minutes, the tunnel curving gently downwards. The ambient temperature displayed on Key's wrist unit held steady at a brutal -20 degrees Celsius, but inside the suits they were stable. The psychological cold, the weight of millions of tons of ice above and around them, was another matter. The tunnel widened abruptly, opening into a vast cavern. This was no melt shaft or drilled access. This was a natural void within the glacier, a chamber preserved for millennia. It was immense, the beams of their helmet lamps struggling to reach the distant walls or the unseen ceiling. The floor was uneven, a landscape of frozen hillocks and depressions. And in the center, dominating the space, was the reason they were here. It lay half-submerged in the cavern floor, encased in ice so clear it was almost invisible like ancient amber. A colossal shape, dark and shaggy, a woolly mammoth. It wasn't a skeleton nor a partial carcass. It was complete. Its head was raised slightly, one massive tusk curving majestically upwards, the other broken off near the base. Thick, reddish-brown hair coated its body in dense mats, visible beneath the ice's surface. Its eyes were closed, appearing almost peaceful. The state of preservation was astounding, far exceeding the initial probe data. Incredible, Thorn whispered, his voice filled with awe. He took hesitant steps forward, unclipping a spectrometer from his belt. The preservation, It's perfect, as if it died yesterday and was flash frozen. Lena joined him, pulling out her sample kit. The ice itself, she murmured, kneeling near the creature's massive foreleg. Look, Aris, the clarity here is different, almost polished. Fewer inclusions than the surrounding glacial ice. Key moved forward, her medical training assessing the scene from a different perspective. Safety first. Watch the footing, she advised, her lamp beam sweeping the uneven floor around the mammoth. Could be melt pools under a thin crust. Ben moved to the cavern entrance, deploying a portable sensor array. Perimeter check. Atmosphere stable. No unexpected seismic activity. Thorn, Petrova, standard non-invasive survey first. No deep drilling until we have baseline readings and Kenji's go-ahead from the surface on the thermal stability. Of course, Thorn said distractedly, already aiming his spectrometer. The tissue viability might be astounding. Key approached the mammoth's head, her lamp tracing the outline of the closed eye, the coarse hair trapped beneath the ice. The ice encasing the creature did seem different. Harder, almost crystalline in structure compared to the more opaque, layered ice forming the cavern walls. Near the base of the broken tusk, where jagged ivory met the ice, tiny, needle-like formations glittered under her lamp beam. Sharp, geometric, unlike typical frost blooms. She leaned closer, adjusting her lamp's focus. They looked like miniature quartz crystals, embedded in the surface layer of the ice encasing the mammoth. Lena, come see this, Key called softly. Near the broken tusk, these ice formations. Lena carefully made her way over, peering where Key indicated. Strange, fractal patterns, not typical sublimation or deposition features. Let me get a macro lens. She fumbled with her kit. Ben was working nearby, securing a secondary anchor point for their safety lines into the ice floor. He used a powered hand drill, its whine unnaturally loud in the cavern. As he leaned over to check the anchor's seating, his gloved hand slipped on a patch of unusually slick ice right at the edge of the mammoth's crystalline enclosure. He grunted as his forearm scraped against a sharp edge of the anchor's mounting plate. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling his arm back. A tear, about 3 inches long, marred the thick outer fabric of his suit sleeve. More significantly, a dark stain was beginning to spread from a shallow gash on his exposed thermal undersuit beneath. Blood. Key was at his side instantly. "Ben, let me see." "It's nothing," he grumbled, trying to inspect it himself. "Just snagged it." "Standard procedure. Let me check the seal and the wound." Key knelt, pulling her med kit forward. She carefully examined the tear in the outer suit. Fabric compromised. Undersuit is torn. How deep is the cut? Ben pulled up the thermal fabric gingerly. A thin line of red welled up on his forearm, beaded with cold. It wasn't deep, perhaps a 1/4 inch, but it was bleeding sluggishly in the intense cold. Barely a scratch. The anchor plate edge. "All right, stay still." Key opened her kit, selecting a sterile cleaning wipe and a biosealant patch. The air was frigid, increasing infection risk despite the sterility. She cleaned the wound quickly, the antiseptic pad coming away stained red. Ben hissed slightly at the sting. As she prepared the sealant, her fingers brushed against the ice where he had slipped. It felt different. Not just cold, but hard like glass and unnaturally smooth despite the microscopic crystalline structures she'd seen nearby. It lacked the usual slightly granular texture of compacted glacial ice. She applied the biosealant patch, pressing it firmly against his skin. It bonded quickly, forming a clear, flexible barrier. Okay, that should hold. Keep an eye on it. Any throbbing numbness, let me know immediately. Fine, thanks, Key. Ben flexed his fingers, then pulled the thermal sleeve back down, followed by the torn outer layer. He seemed more annoyed by the suit damage than the injury. He turned back to his task, testing the anchor point with a grunt of effort. Key stood, glancing back at the mammoth. Her gaze lingered on the strange, crystalline ice formations near the tusk, then drifted to the spot where Ben had slipped. The ice there seemed purer. She made a mental note to ask Lena to take a sample from that specific area. Something about it felt subtly wrong. Thorne's excited voice cut through her thoughts. Lena, readings are off the chart. This ice, it's acting as a perfect preservative. Minimal cellular degradation detected by the deep scan. Lena hurried back to her equipment near the mammoth's flank, her earlier observation about the fractal crystals seemingly forgotten for the moment. Key watched them work, the massive, silent form of the mammoth dominating the cavern, a relic of a lost world. The dripping water echoed. The glacier groaned softly around them, and Ben Carter rubbed his forearm almost imperceptibly, a thoughtful expression hidden behind his mask. The initial sting of the cold and antiseptic was fading, replaced by a peculiar, localized numbness that felt deeper than the surface chill. It wasn't painful, just absent. He dismissed it as the cold working its way into the minor injury. Deep beneath the sealant patch, microscopic crystalline structures, dislodged from the unique ice and transferred via the anchor plate or his glove, encountered warmth and damaged tissue. Dormant for millennia, they registered the change. Preservation protocols, encoded into their very structure, initiated. The slow, cold work began. Chapter 2: The Shiver. Hours bled into one another within the timeless, sunless vault of the ice cavern. Portable work lamps cast stark pools of illumination, creating islands of activity in the vast, sapphire-tinged gloom. The rhythmic chip-chip-chip of Lena Petrova's ice axe echoed as she carefully extracted core samples from the cavern wall, far from the mammoth's immediate vicinity. Her movements were precise, methodical, each sample bagged and labeled with meticulous care. Dr. Thorne, meanwhile, hovered near the mammoth like a disciple at a shrine, running scans with various handheld devices, muttering excitedly into his comlink recorder about tissue density and isotopic ratios. The initial awe had subsided into fervent, focused work. Key Sharma had established a small medical monitoring station near the cavern entrance, laying out emergency supplies and keeping track of core body temperatures and oxygen saturation levels via the remote sensors integrated into their suits. She monitored the environmental sensors Ben had deployed, CO2 levels, seismic tremors, ambient temperature fluctuations. Everything remained within acceptable, if extreme, parameters. The glacier groaned occasionally, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the ice underfoot, a constant reminder of the colossal forces surrounding them. Water continued its relentless trickle, finding new pathways down the walls, freezing into bizarre, curtain-like formations that seemed to subtly reshape the cavern's contours over time. Ben Carter moved with tireless efficiency. He had finished securing the primary anchor points and was now assisting Samir Khan, the comms tech who had descended after the initial entry, in setting up a more robust local communication relay and a high-resolution camera array focused on the mammoth. He hauled heavy equipment cases, drilled secondary support points for the lighting rigs, and checked power conduits with a vigor that seemed almost unnatural given the hours they'd spent working in the debilitating cold. Key watched him lift a generator pack that usually required two people to position comfortably. He settled it onto its designated platform with a grunt, his breath plumbing, but he didn't seem strained. He straightened up, flexing his shoulders. "Need a hand calibrating the wide-angle lens, Ben," Samir called out, fiddling with a camera mounted on a tripod near the mammoth's head. "On it," Ben replied, his voice clear over the comms. He crossed the uneven ice floor with quick, sure strides. He moved with an odd gracefulness, almost light-footed, despite his bulk and the heavy gear. Key frowned slightly. Ben was always fit, always capable, but this level of sustained energy after hours of work at -20°C felt unusual. Standard procedure dictated regular rest breaks, mandatory nutrient-paced ingestion, and careful monitoring for fatigue, which could impair judgment and motor skills rapidly in these conditions. Ben hadn't complained once, hadn't even requested a warming break. She kept her calm. "Ben, how's that arm feeling? Any issues with the seal?" His reply came back instantly. "Arms solid, Key. Seal's holding fine, don't worry about it." There was a slight edge to his tone, a hint of impatience she wasn't used to hearing from him. "Standard check-in," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Your core temp is stable, but your heart rate is slightly elevated for resting." It wasn't dramatically high, just consistently at the upper end of his normal working range, even when he was standing still conferring with Samir. "Just keeping warm," he replied curtly. "This camera setup is tricky. Need to get the focus perfect for Thorn." He turned his attention back to the lens, effectively ending the conversation. Key made a note on her tablet. Subject Carter, sustained high energy levels. Elevated resting heart rate upper normal. Minor irritability noted. Monitor closely. Nearby, Lena had collected her wall samples and now approached the area around the mammoth, her attention drawn back to the peculiar ice formations Key had pointed out earlier. She knelt near the base of the broken tusk, careful not to disturb the main body encasement. She aimed her macro lens, adjusting the focus. "Aris, look at this structure." Lena's voice held a note of scientific curiosity. "The crystalline formations Key spotted. They aren't random frost. They're incredibly complex, almost like lattices, and they seem denser now than a few hours ago." Thorn drifted over, momentarily pulling his attention from the mammoth's hide. He peered at Lena's tablet displaying the magnified image. Intriguing. A unique interaction between the carcass's biochemical emissions and the surrounding ice matrix, perhaps. Trace elements concentrating. We need a sample. Carefully, Lena cautioned. I don't want to compromise the primary encasement. I'll try to get a scraping from the periphery where Ben slipped earlier. That ice felt different. She moved cautiously towards the spot, ice axe in hand, tapping gently before taking a step. Ben, still working with Samuel nearby, glanced over. His eyes, visible behind his visor, seemed to narrow slightly as Lena approached the area of his earlier fall. Careful there, Petrova, Ben said, his voice tight. Ground's unstable around the base. I'm being cautious, Ben, Lena replied, slightly puzzled by his tone. She found the patch of glassy ice. It did seem subtly larger. The crystalline needle's key had noticed more pronounced, spreading outwards in delicate fractal fans across the surface. Kneeling, she used a specialized sterile scraper, carefully flacking off tiny shards of the strange ice into a collection vial. The ice was surprisingly resistant, chipping off with sharp cracks rather than crumbling like normal glacial ice. As she worked, Ben finished his task with the camera and walked over, ostensibly to check the anchor point near where she knelt. He stood slightly too close, looming over her. Key watched the interaction, a prickle of unease running down her spine. Ben wasn't normally overtly protective of the site itself, more focused on personnel safety. Got what you need? Ben asked. His voice was low, lacking its usual warmth. Almost, Lena said, concentrating on scraping another small section. This structure is fascinating. It doesn't match any known ice polymorphism. Ben shifted his weight. His boot crunched on the ice near her hand. Thorne wants baseline atmospheric readings from the far side of the cavern. Samir can handle the rest of the camera setup. Let's go. It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Lena hesitated, vial in hand. I just need another minute here, Ben. Atmospheric survey is priority, Ben stated flatly. He wasn't looking at her but past her, towards the dark recesses of the cavern. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond the audible range. Humidity gradients could affect Thorne's tissue readings. Key stood up from her station. I can run the atmospheric transect, Ben. You should take a mandatory nutrient break. You've been working non-stop. Ben's head snapped towards her. For a moment, his eyes behind the visor seemed unnaturally bright, reflecting the lamplight with an intense, cold sheen. The faint blue tint she'd noticed earlier around the bioseal on his arm seemed more pronounced. Or was it just the play of light on the synthetic material? I'm fine, Key, he insisted. Energy levels are good, better than good, this place. It's invigorating. He actually smiled, a thin, humorless expression. Let's get those readings, Petrova. He gestured towards the darkness. Lena, seemingly deciding it wasn't worth arguing, sealed her sample vial, tucked it carefully into her pouch, and stood up. All right, lead the way. Ben turned and strode towards the cavern's unlit perimeter, his lamp beam cutting a sharp path. Lena followed, casting a slightly uncertain glance back towards Key and Thorne. Thorne himself was oblivious, muttering about mitochondrial preservation. Key watched them go until their lights were distant pinpricks. Ben's word choice, invigorating, struck her as odd. Nobody described working in a sub-zero ice cave, miles from the surface, as invigorating. Exhausting, challenging, awe-inspiring perhaps, but not invigorating. She checked his vitals again on her tablet. Heart rate still elevated. Skin temperature sensor near the wound site read fractionally lower than the surrounding area, despite his claim of feeling warm. An anomaly. Possibly sensor error due to the patch. She made another note. She walked over to where Lena had been sampling. Kneeling down, she examined the glassy ice patch. The crystalline structures were definitely more prominent than when she first saw them. Tiny, razor-sharp spicules, arranged in complex geometric patterns, glittered under her lamp. They seemed to grow from the main body of ice encasing the mammoth, spreading like a slow, frozen mold. She touched a gloved finger to the surface. It was hard as quartz and felt colder than the surrounding ice, sucking the heat from her glove almost instantly. She pulled her hand back, a shiver tracing its way up her spine that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. A loud crack echoed from the depths of the cavern, followed by a low, grinding rumble, deeper and more prolonged than the usual groans. Dustings of ice powder sifted down from the unseen ceiling. Seismic, Key spoke into her calm, directing the question primarily to Ben and Lena, who were further in. A pause filled only by the settling sounds of the ice. Then Ben's voice, calm, almost too calm. Negative, minor settling event, localized fracture propagation. No structural compromise detected on the scanners. We're clear. Understood, Key replied, though his rapid assessment felt slightly dismissive. These settling events were common, but this one had felt different, heavier. She looked back at the mammoth. Its placid, frozen face seemed to watch them, a silent observer in its azure tomb. The strange, crystalline ice creeping around its base glittered faintly. It looked less like ice and more like a disease, slowly consuming the ancient giant, spreading outward. Spreading towards where Ben had fallen, where Lena had just knelt. Spreading into the cavern. Key activated her comm again, this time on a private channel to the surface. Base camp, this is Sharma. Requesting geologist consult. Kenji, are you available? A moment of static, then Dr. Tanaka's voice, slightly distorted by the distance. Tanaka here. Go ahead, Key. Kenji, we're observing some unusual ice formations around the primary specimen. Highly crystalline, fractal patterns, unusually hard. Lena took a sample, but Ben reported a localized fracture event moments ago. Any correlation with the geothermal activity you're monitoring? Another pause. Interesting on the ice formation. Need Lena's analysis on that. The tremor was minor, Key. Registered on the surface sensors but well within expected parameters for glacial adjustment, especially with the melt acceleration. No immediate concerns from up here. Is the team okay? Team is operational, Key confirmed, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Ben Carter reported feeling invigorated by the cold. His energy levels are unusually high. I have him on close monitoring. Tanaka sounded thoughtful. Could be adrenaline, psychological factors. Isolation and the discovery itself can do strange things. Keep me updated on his vitals and behavior. And get Lena's sample analysis prioritized when possible. "Will do, Sharma out." Key switched off the comm, invigorated. The word echoed in her mind. She looked at the spot where Ben had slipped at the glittering crystalline ice. It wasn't just invigoration he was feeling, she suspected. It was something else. A change. The glacier groaned again, a long, low sigh that seemed to resonate from the very heart of the ice. And in the distance, two helmet lamps moved steadily deeper into the darkness, one burning perhaps just a little too brightly. Chapter 3: Crystalline Veins. The deeper reaches of the cavern swallowed the light from their helmet lamps. Ben Carter moved ahead of Lena Petrova, his strides long and certain over the treacherous, uneven ice. The air here felt older, colder, carrying a profound stillness undisturbed for millennia until their intrusion. Water dripped incessantly, the sound magnified in the confined spaces they navigated, echoing from unseen heights. Lena found herself needing to almost jog to keep pace with Ben, his energy seemingly boundless. "Slow down a little, Ben," Lena requested, her breath misting heavily. "Need to get readings from these walls. The thermal lance radiation might not have penetrated this far." Ben paused, turning. His lamp beam swept back towards her, momentarily dazzling. "Plenty of time for readings. Let's map the perimeter first. Thorne wants the full dimensions." He gestured deeper into the oppressive darkness. "This way looks promising, less fractured ice." He set off again. Lena hesitated, aiming her own lamp at the ice wall beside her. It wasn't smooth like the drilled access tunnel. It was rough, ancient ice, layered and buckled by unimaginable pressure. But embedded within it, like pale blue veins, were thin, branching lines of the same crystalline structure she'd sampled near the mammoth. Here, they were less concentrated, more delicate, but undeniably present. "Ben, hold up," she called again. "There are more crystalline formations here, deep in the matrix." He stopped but didn't turn back immediately. He tilted his head, directing his lamp beam towards a distant drip source high up in the darkness. "Hear that?" he asked, his voice oddly resonant. "Steady drip. Must be a significant melt channel feeding from above." Lena strained her ears. She could hear the general soundscape of dripping water, but picking out a specific source at that distance was impossible for her. "I don't hear anything specific. Ben, these crystals." He finally turned, walking back towards her slowly. "Crystals." He shone his lamp where she indicated. "Looks like standard pressure ice formations to me. Nothing unusual." "It's the same structure as near the mammoth," Lena insisted, pointing her own beam for emphasis. "Hard, geometric, not like typical glacial ice. I took a sample back there." Ben leaned closer, peering at the wall. His helmet was only inches from the crystalline vein. He reached out a gloved hand, touching the formation. "Feels like ice, cold." He rubbed his fingers along it. "Maybe slightly harder, probably just mineral inclusions." He straightened up, dismissing it. "We need to keep moving. Full perimeter survey." Lena felt a surge of frustration but suppressed it. Arguing with Ben in the depths of the cave wasn't productive. His focus seemed locked onto completing the survey task with single-minded intensity. She made a mental note of the location, resolving to come back with Key later. Still, his dismissal felt abrupt, almost protective of the strange ice, and his ability to pinpoint that distant drip, unsettling. They continued their circuit, penetrating deeper into the cavern complex than the initial probes had indicated. The main chamber housing the mammoth was just one part of a larger network of voids and passages hidden within the glacier. Ben navigated the terrain with an unnerving confidence, choosing paths through jumbles of fallen ice blocks and across slick, sloping floors that Lena would have hesitated to attempt alone. His physical endurance remained remarkable. He showed no signs of fatigue, his breathing steady and deep even after strenuous climbing. Back in the main cavern, Key monitored their progress via the tracker signals on her tablet. Their icons moved steadily along the projected perimeter. She rechecked Ben's vitals. Heart rate still high normal. Skin temperature near the wound site consistently registered 0.3 degrees Celsius lower than his overall average. Not a huge variance, but persistent. She zoomed in on the diagnostic reading for the bioseal itself. The material was rated for extreme temperatures, designed to remain inert. Yet the microsensors embedded within the patch showed localized energy fluctuations near the wound interface, almost like static discharge, too low to trigger an alarm but definitely not standard. Samir Khan was meticulously checking the data feed from the high-resolution cameras now bathing the mammoth in steady, neutral light. "Image quality is excellent," he reported over the local comm. "Thorne should be pleased, getting incredible detail on the hair structure and skin texture through the ice." "Good work, Samir," Key acknowledged distractedly. She walked over to the spot where Lena had taken her sample. The glassy ice patch seemed unchanged, the crystalline patterns sharp and defined. She resisted the urge to touch it again. Instead, she focused her helmet lamp on the sealant patch on her own suit's knee where she'd knelt earlier. Nothing unusual. She checked the soles of her boots. Clean. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the cavern, louder than before, followed by a shower of ice shards raining down from the ceiling near the entrance tunnel. Not powder this time, but jagged pieces, some fist-sized, impacting the floor with solid thuds. "Impact," Key yelled, instinctively ducking and shielding her head. Samir scrambled back from the cameras. Thorne, startled from his absorption, stumbled away from the mammoth. The installed lighting rigs flickered violently as the shockwave vibrated through the ice. "Status," Key demanded into the comm. "Ben Lena." Static crackled for a terrifying second. Then Lena's voice, breathless. "We're okay. Significant icefall near us too. Sealed passage behind us." "Ben," Key repeated urgently. Another pause. Then Ben's voice unbelievably calm. "Confirming Lena's report. Minor blockage. We're secure. Assessing alternate egress route." "Minor blockage." Lena's voice cut in again, strained. "Ben, it's a total collapse. The way we came in is gone." "Negative." Ben's voice was flat, devoid of alarm. "The scanners show fractured ice navigable, minimal delay." Key exchanged a wide-eyed look with Samir. Ben's assessment directly contradicted Lena's panicked report. "Ben, hold your position, both of you. We need to assess the overall stability here first." "Kenji, surface, report." Tanaka's voice came back quickly, tight with concern. "Major seismic event registered, Key. Epicenter seems localized within your immediate area. Multiple fracture warnings on the subglacial sensors. How bad is it down there? Significant icefall in the main cavern and reports of passage collapse deeper in, Key relayed, her eyes scanning the ceiling nervously. Another low groan shuddered through the ice beneath her feet. Thorn, Samir, check the integrity of the entrance tunnel walkway now. Thorn and Samir hurried towards the access tunnel, their lamps sweeping the connection point. Walkway seems secure, Thorn reported back after a moment. Some debris on the floor, but the structure holds. Ben, Lena, report your exact position and status. Do you require immediate assistance? Key pressed. Position locked on your tracker, Ben replied coolly. Assistance not required. Proceeding with survey via alternate route. Ben, wait for. Lena started, but her voice was cut off. Comms interference, Ben stated. Maintaining primary objective. Carter out. The channel went silent from their end, leaving only the background hiss. Damn it, Key swore, hitting the side of her helmet. She tried hailing them again. Nothing. Samir, can you boost the signal towards their sector? Samir frantically worked his console. Trying. There's massive interference. Something spiking the M field down there. Could be the seismic activity stressing piezoelectric quartz in the rock beneath, or, he trailed off looking uneasy, or something else. Thorn reappeared from the tunnel entrance check. The main shaft seems stable for now, but Tanaka advises caution, potential for aftershocks. He looked towards the dark area where Ben and Lena had vanished. Should we mount a retrieval? Key considered rapidly. Sending a team into an unstable, collapsing section with communications down was incredibly risky. Ben was the security lead. His assessment, however detached it sounded, carried weight. But Lena's panic felt genuine, and Ben's behavior. We hold for now, Key decided. Samir, keep trying to re-establish comms. Monitor their tracker signals closely. Thorn, focus on securing the mammoth data fast. If we have to evacuate, we need that primary data backed up. I'm going to run Lena's sample. Maybe it can tell us something. She moved quickly to the portable analysis unit set up near her medical station. Lena had thankfully labeled the vial clearly. Crystalline ice sample mammoth base area alpha. Key carefully loaded a tiny shard into the spectral analyzer's chamber. The machine whirred, lasers scanning the sample, feeding data to her tablet. She watched the spectral lines resolve. Water ice predominantly, trace minerals consistent with glacial composition, silicates, feldspar carbonates, but there was something else. Complex organic molecules surprisingly well preserved, protein fragments, lipids, and something the system flagged as anomalous, intricate, repeating microstructures suspended within the ice matrix itself. Not microbial cells, not viral capsids. Something different. Geometric, almost crystalline in their structure, yet exhibiting organic spectral signatures. She cross-referenced the protein fragments against the expedition's database. No direct matches to known Earth life, ancient or modern. But there were partial matches, eerie similarities to proteins found in certain extremophile organisms, psychrophiles, cold-loving bacteria, and piezophiles, pressure-loving organisms. And strangely, faint structural similarities to prion proteins, known for their ability to misfold and replicate without genetic material. A new alert popped up. The analyzer detected a faint, localized energy signature emanating from the sample itself. Not chemical luminescence, not residual heat, a low-level electromagnetic field pulsing rhythmically. "Samir," Key called, her voice low. "Remember that M interference you mentioned?" "Yeah." The ice sample Lena collected. "It's emitting a weak M field, pulsing." Samir stared at her, his eyes wide. "Ice doesn't do that, Key." "I know." Key zoomed in on the image of the microstructures. They looked like tiny, perfectly formed snowflakes, but with an internal complexity that was unsettling. They were laced with the anomalous protein fragments. Were these the parasite? Not a worm, not a microbe, but something crystalline, organic, and somehow energetic. Something that thrived in extreme cold and pressure, capable of preserving biological material around itself. Her gaze drifted to the tracker display. Ben and Lena's icons were still moving, slowly navigating the deeper caverns. Ben's icon seemed to be heading directly towards a known geothermal hotspot marked on Kenji's subglacial map, an area where volcanic heat met the ancient ice. An area likely to have unusual energy readings and potentially accelerated melt or strange chemical interactions. Why was he going there, especially after a collapse? She looked back at the mammoth, silent and immense in its icy shroud. The crystalline formations around its base seemed to pulse faintly in her peripheral vision, mirroring the rhythm on her analysis screen. A horrifying thought began to form. The parasite didn't just preserve, it integrated. It replicated using the host's own biomatter, stabilized by the cold and its own crystalline structure. And maybe, just maybe, it sought out energy sources to fuel its strange processes. The wound on Ben's arm, the glassy ice, his relentless energy, his heightened senses, his strange focus, his resistance to the cold, the crystalline growth spreading through the cave. It was all connected. The cryovermes wasn't just preserving, it was converting. Ben wasn't just infected, he was becoming a host, a vessel slowly turning into something else, driven by the parasite's imperative to survive and spread in the face of the encroaching melt. And he was leading Lena directly into the heart of its expanding influence. Chapter 4: The Geothermal Heart. The passage Ben Carter forced them through was less a tunnel and more a jagged wound in the glacier's flank. Ice blocks the size of small vehicles choked the route, remnants of the collapse Lena had witnessed. Where Ben saw a navigable path, Lena saw a death trap, a chaotic jumble poised for further collapse with the slightest tremor. Yet, Ben moved through it with an eerie certainty, bracing massive slabs with one arm while clearing smaller debris with the other, his strength seemingly amplified by the biting cold. He never hesitated, never seemed to doubt the stability of the ice underfoot or overhead. "Ben, this is insane," Lena pleaded, scrambling after him over a tilted block of sapphire ice. Her lamp beam caught the network of fine fractures covering its surface. "We need to go back. Try to dig through the main collapse. Signal key." Ben paused atop the block, looking down at her. His face, illuminated from below by her lamp, seemed paler than usual, drawn tight. His eyes, behind the visor, reflected the light with a flat, intense quality. "Going back is inefficient. This route leads directly to the primary thermal anomaly. Essential data. Essential for what? Lena demanded, her voice tight with fear and exertion. Thorne cares about the mammoth, not some geothermal vent. Thorne collects data, Ben stated simply, as if explaining something obvious to a child. We provide it, all of it. The heat signature is part of the environmental context, crucial for understanding the preservation. He tapped his helmet near his temple. Sensors indicate optimal path this way, minimal structural instability ahead. Lena stared up at him. His breathing wasn't even labored. Her own lungs burned with the effort and the frigid air. He claimed to be using sensors, but his movements felt more instinctive, predictive. He seemed to anticipate the shifting ice, placing his feet precisely where purchase was most secure, moments before a minor shift proved him right. My suitcom is dead, Lena said, tapping the unit on her wrist. Total static. Can you reach key? Ben turned away, already moving. Negative, localized interference, consistent with geothermal activity and piezoelectric discharge from stressed ice formations. Expected. He offered no solution, no concern. They pressed on. The narrow passage opened slightly, revealing more of the intricate crystalline veins lacing the ancient ice walls. Here, they were thicker, pulsing with a faint internal luminescence that Lena was certain wasn't just reflected light. They seemed to follow the path Ben chose, converging deeper within the glacier. Ben occasionally reached out, running his gloved fingers over the crystalline surfaces with an odd possessiveness, his head tilted as if appreciating a subtle vibration. Don't touch that stuff, Ben, Lena warned, remembering Key's analysis of the sample. We don't know what it is. He retracted his hand slowly, flexing his fingers. A low hum seemed to emanate from him, or perhaps from the ice itself. Lena couldn't be sure. It's stable, he murmured, almost to himself. Strong. The air began to change. The biting -20 cold lessened almost imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably. Wisps of condensation, unrelated to their breath, curled in the beams of their lamps. Steam. We must be getting close to the hot spot, Lena observed, her apprehension growing. Mixing geothermal heat with potentially unstable glacial ice sounded like a recipe for disaster. Ben nodded, his pace quickening further. Optimal conditions approaching. Optimal for what? Lena asked again, but he didn't answer. He seemed focused on something ahead, something only he could perceive. The passage widened into another cavern, smaller than the mammoth chamber but dramatically different. The walls weren't sheer ice but a chaotic mixture of dark volcanic rock and glacier. Geothermal heat radiated from fissures in the rock, creating billowing clouds of steam where it met the ice. The air was thick with moisture, heavy with the smell of sulfur and minerals, and the crystalline growths were everywhere. They coated the rocks near the fissures like frost, but thicker, more complex. They formed intricate, bridge-like structures spanning gaps between ice and rock. In pools of meltwater warmed by the heat, clusters of the crystals seemed to grow like submerged reeds, glowing faintly from within. Ben, look at this, Lena breathed, momentarily distracted from her fear by the bizarre ecosystem. It's thriving here. The heat accelerates its growth. Ben didn't look at the overall scene. His attention was fixed on the center of the cavern. There, a large fissure vented a steady plume of steam. Encircling the fissure like grotesque petals were larger crystalline formations, and nestled amongst them, partially encased in the glowing ice, were other shapes, dark mammalian forms, not as large as the mammoth but recognizable. A cave bear, its skull locked in a frozen rictus. Several prehistoric elk, their antlers tangled in crystalline webs. And something smaller, vaguely humanoid, curled in on itself, all perfectly preserved, yet integrated into the crystalline structures, veins of the glowing material running through their frozen tissues, connecting them to the central fissure. "My God," Lena whispered, "they weren't just preserved, they were incorporated." Ben walked slowly towards the central fissure, his movements reverent. He stopped before the frozen, vaguely human shape. It was ancient, clad in decayed hides, its features obscured by the crystalline growth that seemed to emanate from its chest cavity, fusing it to the larger structure. "Preservation," Ben murmured. His voice was different now, lower, flatter, with a faint, resonant quality that mirrored the hum Lena had sensed earlier. "The cold preserves, the heat accelerates, integrates, makes permanent." He reached out towards the frozen figure. His glove hovered inches from the crystalline surface encasing it. "Ben, do!" Lena cried out, taking a step forward. He turned his head slowly towards her. His visor was fogged slightly from the steam, but his eyes behind it seemed luminous, reflecting the glow of the crystals around them. A faint, web-like pattern, like frost on a window pane, was visible on his skin at the edge of his mask seal, creeping up from his neck. The blue tint under the torn fabric on his arm wasn't just the sealant anymore. It was his skin. "It's not painful, Lena," he said, his voice calm, hypnotic. "There's no decay, no loss, just continuation, stability, permanence against the melt." He gestured around the cavern. "They are safe here, protected, joined." Lena backed away slowly, her hand instinctively going to the emergency flare gun clipped to her belt. "Ben, that thing, the parasite key warned us about. It's got you. It's changing you." He looked down at his own hands, flexing the fingers. Ice crystals glittered on the surface of his gloves, forming and reforming rapidly in the steamy air. "Change is necessary. The melt is coming. Dissolution, chaos." He looked back at her, his gaze unnervingly direct. "This offers structure, purpose, preservation of consciousness within the matrix." "Consciousness," Lena felt a chill deeper than the ice. "You mean they're still aware, trapped in there?" "Aware," Ben tilted his head again, that listening posture. The resonant hum intensified slightly. "Awareness shifts, individual concerns fade, become part of the whole, the structure endures." He took a step towards her. "You are degrading, Lena, your fear, your inefficient biological processes. You could be stable, permanent." Lena raised the flare gun, her hand trembling. "Stay back, Ben." He stopped, observing the weapon with detached curiosity. "That generates heat, inefficient, counterproductive to preservation." He took another slow step. His movements were deliberate, unnervingly fluid. The frost patterns on his neck seemed to have spread further up his cheek. "I mean it, Ben." The structure requires more nodes, Ben stated, his voice losing more of its human inflection, becoming a resonant monotone. The heat provides the energy for integration. This chamber is a nexus, a nursery. He gestured towards the fissure, towards the crystalline encased creatures. They await the final freeze. This melt, it is an interruption, an anomaly to be overcome. He took another step. Lena squeezed the trigger. With a loud whoosh, the flare erupted, launching a magnesium-white projectile that struck Ben squarely in the chest. The impact staggered him, pushing him back a step. The flare itself bounced off, sputtering against the ice floor, but the intense heat ignited the outer layer of his suit instantly. Orange flames blossomed across his torso. Lena expected screams, panic. Instead, Ben looked down at the flames with something akin to surprise, then annoyance. He raised his hands not to beat out the fire, but towards the crystalline structures lining the cavern walls. The low hum intensified dramatically, vibrating through the air, through the rock, through Lena's bones. Steam hissed violently as the flames met the supercooled layers of his infected tissues. Then something impossible happened. The crystalline veins on the walls pulsed with brighter light. Fine, glittering tendrils of ice, like living frost, snaked out from the nearest formations, reaching towards Ben. They touched the edges of the flames, not melting but seeming to absorb the heat. The fire diminished rapidly, smothered not by lack of oxygen but by an active, aggressive cold. Within seconds the flames died, leaving behind blackened, charred fabric and exposed patches of Ben's undersuit. Where the flames had been hottest, his skin was visible beneath the tatters. It wasn't burned. It was covered in a thick, translucent layer of crystalline ice, fused directly to his flesh, glowing with a faint blue light. The frost patterns from his neck now covered half his face, obscuring his features in a glittering, inhuman mask. He looked up at Lena, the luminous eyes within the crystalline structure devoid of pain or anger. Only cold, implacable purpose remained. Heat is inefficient, the voice resonated deeper, less human than before. It seemed to come from Ben, yet also from the cavern itself. Integration requires cold, stability. He raised a hand towards her. His fingers were elongating, ice crystals forming sharp points at the tips. You will join the structure, Lena. You will be preserved. Lena turned and ran, stumbling frantically back the way they came, towards the treacherous, collapsed passage, praying it hadn't sealed completely behind them. The resonant hum followed her, echoing in the steamy, sulphurous air of the geothermal heart. Chapter 5: Echoes in the Ice. Panic clawed at Lena Petrova's throat, cold and sharp as the ice fragments skittering under her boots. She scrambled back through the narrow, debris-choked passage, her helmet lamp bouncing erratically, painting fragmented nightmares on the shifting walls. Behind her, the resonant hum persisted, a physical weight against her eardrums, punctuated by the steady, unnervingly calm crunch of Ben Carter's enhanced strides on the ice. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. The route that had seemed merely treacherous on the way and now felt actively malevolent. Ice blocks shifted with soft groans, settling into new positions, narrowing gaps she had squeezed through moments before. Was it just the glacier settling after the tremor, or was he doing it? Could the parasite, through Ben, manipulate the ice itself? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her. She pushed it down, focusing only on forward momentum. Escape. Survival. She reached the area of the major collapse, the wall of fractured ice and snow that Ben had dismissed as navigable. It looked even worse now. Huge, tilted slabs leaned precariously, gaps between them showing only deeper darkness or impenetrable compacted ice. Lena frantically swept her lamp beam across the barrier, searching for any opening, any weakness. "It is sealed, Lena." The voice resonated from behind her, closer now. Ben emerged from the narrow passage into the slightly wider space before the collapse. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, his head tilted slightly. The crystalline mask covering half his face glittered, the luminous eyes within fixed on her. The charred remnants of his outer suit hung like dark rags, revealing more of the glowing, ice-fused undersuit and the crystalline structure integrated with his skin. Ice particles swirled around him, drawn towards his cold presence. "The structure provides," the voice continued, a low vibration in the air. "Stability, containment." Lena backed away until her pack hit the solid wall of the collapse. Trapped. She fumbled with the clips on her belt, her fingers numb and clumsy inside the thick gloves. Ice axe. She needed her ice axe. She finally grasped the handle, pulling the tool free. It felt pitifully small against the thing Ben had become. "Leave me alone, Ben," she yelled, her voice high and thin. She held the axe defensively, its pick aimed towards him. Ben stopped about 10 feet away. He made no threatening move, simply observed her, his head tilted. The resonant hum deepened slightly. Individuality is inefficient, prone to error, fear, decay. He raised a hand, the one with the elongated, crystalline fingertips. He wasn't pointing it at her, but towards the ice wall beside her. "The matrix preserves the essential patterns. Consciousness integrated, shared, strengthened." As he spoke, the crystalline veins embedded in the ice wall next to Lena pulsed with brighter blue light. A low cracking sound started, emanating from within the ice. Not a collapse, but a shaping. Fine tendrils of the crystalline frost, like the ones that had smothered the flare, began to grow rapidly from the wall, reaching towards her. Lena cried out, swinging the ice axe wildly at the encroaching tendrils. The pick shattered the delicate structures, sending glittering shards flying, but more grew instantly to replace them, faster, thicker. They were like living ice vines, attempting to entangle her. "Cooperate, Lena," Ben's resonant voice echoed. "Resistance expends energy needlessly. Integration is inevitable, peaceful." She hacked desperately, backing along the wall, trying to find a gap, any escape. The crystalline growth surged from the ice floor as well, attempting to grasp her boots. She stumbled, falling hard onto her side. The ice axe clattered away across the uneven floor. Before she could recover, thick, glowing crystalline bands erupted from the floor and wall, pinning her arms and legs against the ice. They weren't crushing, not yet, but they held her fast, cold, seeping instantly through her suit. Panic seized her completely. She struggled futilely against the icy bonds, the hard, crystalline surfaces scraping against her suit. Ben walked slowly closer, the resonant hum surrounding her, seeming to vibrate within her very bones. He knelt beside her, his luminous, inhuman eyes studying her face behind the visor. "The transition can be eased," he stated. He reached out his crystalline hand not towards her face but towards her helmet comm unit. With surprising delicacy, the sharp fingertips manipulated the controls. A burst of static erupted in her ears, then cleared slightly. A final message, an offering to the remaining nodes, an invitation. He leaned closer, his voice dropping into her comm channel, layered over the pervasive hum. Key, Samir, Thorn, cease inefficient resistance. The melt is temporary, the structure endures. Optimal integration site prepared. Join us, be preserved. Then silence. He had cut the link. Lena stared up at him, horrified. He hadn't just trapped her, he was using her as bait. Ben rose, turning away from her. He faced the massive wall of the collapse. He raised both hands, palms outward towards the seemingly impenetrable barrier. The resonant hum built rapidly, the entire passage vibrating. The crystalline veins throughout the ice pulsed fiercely, bathing the space in an intense, throbbing blue light. The air temperature plummeted, moisture instantly freezing, coating Lena's visor with frost. With a sound like tearing mountains, the ice blocks of the collapse began to move. Not falling, but deliberately shifting, grinding against each other, pushed by an unseen force directed by the figure standing before them. A gap appeared, then widened. Ben was forcing a path through the collapse, reshaping the glacier itself. Back in the main cavern, the mammoth stood silent under the stark work lights. Key Sharma stared at her analysis screen. The spectral data of the crystalline ice burned into her mind. Organic molecules, extremophile protein similarities, prion-like structures, localized M fields. It painted a picture of something ancient, alien, and terrifyingly efficient. "Anything?" she asked Samir, who was hunched over the comms console, furiously trying to bypass the interference blocking Ben and Lena's channel. Samir shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "Nothing. The M field spike is massive now, centered on their last known position near that geothermal vent. It's overwhelming the relay. It's not natural interference, Key. It's too focused, too patterned." Thorn paced near the mammoth, agitated. "We should have mounted a retrieval. Carter's injured, Petrova's potentially panicking. Protocol demands." "Protocol also demands not sending more personnel into an unstable zone with no comms, Aris," Key snapped, her own nerves frayed. "Especially when the security lead is," she trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Infected, compromised, becoming something else." Suddenly, Lena's voice burst from the main speaker, garbled, filled with static and overlaid with a deep, resonant hum. "Ben insane. Trap. Crystalline. Growing." The message was fragmented, cut short by terror. Then, abruptly, the voice shifted, becoming the deeper, resonant monotone they'd heard briefly before, clearer now, chillingly calm. "Key, Samir, Thorn, cease inefficient resistance. The melt is temporary, the structure endures. Optimal integration site prepared, join us, be preserved." The transmission ended, plunging the cavern into shocked silence, broken only by the constant dripping of water and the low hum of the generator. Samir stared at the console, aghast. That wasn't Ben's normal voice. And Lena, gods, what's happening to them? Thorn looked pale, his scientific curiosity finally overshadowed by dawning horror. Integration, structure, what does that mean? Key's mind raced, connecting the fragmented message with her analysis. Crystalline, growing, integration site, structure. The parasite wasn't just preserving individuals, it was building something. Using hosts as nodes, incorporating them into a larger, interconnected crystalline matrix. Ben wasn't just a host. He was becoming an architect, a recruiter, empowered by the geothermal energy. It's the parasite, Key said, her voice grim. It's taking them, using them. Ben is compromised. He's actively trying to assimilate Lena, and now us. As if summoned by her words, a low groan emanated not from the cavern walls, but from the center of the room, from the mammoth. They all turned towards it. The clear, crystalline ice encasing the massive creature seemed subtly different, less transparent. Thin, opaque lines like hairline fractures filled with frost were spreading across its surface, originating from the base where the strange crystals grew. Samir aimed one of the high-resolution cameras, zooming in. The image appeared on Key's tablet. The lines weren't fractures. They were veins, identical to the crystalline veins Lena had described seeing deeper in the caves, now visibly growing through the ice encasing the mammoth, converging towards its dark, hairy bulk. "It's spreading," Samir whispered. "Here too." Another sound reached them, a faint, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch coming from the direction of the main access tunnel, steady, determined. Key's blood ran cold. "Samir, check the entrance proximity sensors." Samir's fingers flew across his console. His eyes widened. Something in the tunnel, moving towards us fast. The crunching grew louder, echoing in the smooth-bored tunnel. It wasn't the sound of human footsteps in thermal boots. It was heavier, sharper, like claws or crystalline points digging into the ice floor. Key grabbed her medical kit, her mind racing through emergency protocols that suddenly seemed utterly inadequate. Thorne fumbled for the heavy-duty tranquilizer rifle they'd brought for potential megafauna encounters, though its utility against whatever was coming felt dubious. Samir armed the remote system for the thermal lance near the tunnel mouth, a desperate last resort. The crunching stopped, right at the tunnel's entrance into the cavern. A shadow fell across the illuminated opening. A figure stood silhouetted against the tunnel lights, tall, bulky. But the shape was wrong. Jagged, crystalline spurs erupted from its shoulders and back. One arm ended not in a glove, but in elongated, razor-sharp ice talons. Half of its face was a glittering, inhuman mask of crystalline frost, the single visible eye burning with cold, blue light. It was Ben. It was the creature from the geothermal chamber. The ancient, frozen humanoid, now somehow mobile, integrated, animated by the same force that held Lena captive and had transformed Ben Carter. The structure was sending another emissary. The resonant hum filled the cavern, seeming to emanate from the creature itself, a low thrum of inevitable assimilation. It took a step into the main chamber, its crystalline feet crunching on the ice. Preservation had arrived. Chapter 6: The Crystal Vanguard. The creature stood framed in the tunnel mouth, a nightmare sculpted from ancient ice and violated flesh. Crystalline spurs jutted from its form at unnatural angles, catching the work lights and fracturing them into cold, sharp spectra. The resonant hum intensified, pressing against Key Sharma's ears, vibrating deep within her chest cavity. It wasn't just sound. It felt like a physical force, tightening the air. For a frozen second, no one moved. Key's training screamed at her, assess, analyze, react, but her body was locked in primal fear. Beside her, Samir Khan made a choked sound, his hands hovering over the thermal lance controls on his console. Dr. Aris Thorne, pale and trembling, finally broke the paralysis, shouldering the bulky tranquilizer rifle. Its targeting laser painted a small red dot on the center mass of the crystalline humanoid. "Stay back," Thorne yelled, his voice cracking. "Do not advance." The creature ignored him. It took another step into the cavern, its movements stiff, ancient, yet unnervingly precise. The crystalline growths that formed its feet crunched loudly on the ice floor, each step deliberate, final. Its single visible eye, burning with a cold blue phosphorescence within the jagged mask of ice, scanned the cavern, passing over the humans without apparent interest, fixing instead on the colossal, ice-bound form of the mammoth. Awakens. Thorne fired the rifle. The heavy tranquilizer dart, designed to penetrate thick hide and deliver potent sedatives, flew true, striking the creature's torso. It hit the crystalline structure with a sharp crack, embedding itself perhaps half an inch deep before stopping abruptly. The red fletching quivered. There was no other reaction. No stagger, no pause, no acknowledgement of the impact. The creature continued its slow, inexorable advance towards the mammoth. "No effect," Thorne stammered, lowering the rifle slightly, disbelief warring with terror on his face. "The tranks didn't penetrate." "Samir, the lance!" Key shouted, finding her voice. She simultaneously pulled her emergency medical scanner, aiming it at the creature, desperately trying to get any biological readings, anything to understand what they faced. Samir's fingers flew across the console. The heavy thermal lance mounted near the tunnel entrance, designed for controlled melting and excavation, swiveled on its automated turret, locking onto the advancing figure. Target acquired. Engaging. A beam of concentrated heat, invisible but carrying immense energy, shot from the lance's emitter. The air directly in front of the creature shimmered violently. Where the beam struck its crystalline carapace, there was an immediate violent reaction, not melting but explosive sublimation. Shards of crystal burst outward with sharp cracking sounds, vaporizing instantly into clouds of steam. A high-pitched whine, like stressed glass, emanated from the creature, momentarily overriding the deeper hum. It staggered, its advance halting for the first time. Its head snapped towards the lance emitter, the blue eye flaring with sudden intensity. The creature raised its arm, the one ending in elongated ice talons. "Keep firing, Samir," Key urged, watching her scanner readings fluctuate wildly. Extreme cold radiating from the creature, fighting the lance's heat. Strange energy signatures spiking, but no discernible life signs. No heartbeat, no respiration. Just complex M fields and thermal dynamics. "I'm hitting it," Samir yelled, adjusting the beam's focus, trying to concentrate the energy. "It's resisting." The creature didn't try to shield itself further. Instead, it focused its attention on the lance emitter. The resonant hum pulsed rapidly. The crystalline veins in the ice floor and walls around the lance mount glowed fiercely. With a groan of protesting metal and fracturing ice, the automated turret seized up, locking at a skewed angle. The thermal beam sputtered, then cut out abruptly. Warning icons flashed across Samir's console. Power conduit failure. It froze the line solid from the inside out. Samir slammed his fist on the console. The lance is offline. The creature lowered its arm. Patches of its crystalline surface were scarred, pitted from the thermal beam, but already new crystals seemed to be growing over the damage, knitting the structure back together with visible speed. It turned its attention back to the mammoth, resuming its deliberate march. The temporary halt had cost it only a few seconds. It was now halfway across the cavern, approaching the perimeter of the specialized lighting set up around the primary specimen. Key watched its movements, forcing her panicked mind to analyze. The joints, where limbs met torso, the neck, the ankles, they seemed less heavily crystallized, more like compacted, articulated ice. Was that a weakness? Aris, aim for the joints, Key directed. Try to cripple its mobility. Thorn jolted back into action, raised the rifle again, trying to steady his aim on the creature's knee joint. Before he could fire, the creature made a low gesture with its free hand. The resonant hum focused, and the work lamp nearest the creature exploded in a shower of sparks and glass, plunging that section of the cavern into deeper shadow. "It's taking out the lights," Samir gasped. The creature didn't pause. It reached the edge of the clear, harder ice surrounding the mammoth. The crystalline veins covering the mammoth's icy tomb pulsed in synchrony with the creature's own hum. It reached out its taloned hand, pressing it against the ancient ice encasing the giant. A deep, groaning vibration started, emanating from the mammoth itself. Not the groan of shifting glacial ice, but something deeper, more resonant. The crystalline veins across the mammoth's surface glowed intensely, the network spreading visibly, crawling up its legs, across its flank, towards its massive head. The entire cavern seemed to thrum with rising energy. "It's doing something to the mammoth," Thorn cried out, activating it. "It's integrating it fully into the structure," Key realized with horror. Like Ben said, adding a new node, a big one. If that creature could animate itself, could it animate the mammoth? The thought was paralyzing. They needed to stop it. Now, Key looked around frantically. The thermal lance was down, tranks were useless. What was left? The heavy drilling equipment, too slow, explosives. They didn't have any, deemed too risky for the glacier. Her eyes fell on the geothermal specialist's equipment crate, left behind when Kenji Tanaka remained on the surface. Inside were probes, sensors, and a portable geothermal drill, essentially a smaller, hand-operated thermal lance designed for boring deep sample holes. High risk, close range. "Samir, cover me." Thorn, distraction fire, aim for the head, keep it looking away from the mammoth. Key yelled, already sprinting towards the equipment crate. Samir grabbed a heavy wrench from the tool kit, his face grim. Thorn, understanding dawning, started firing the tranquilizer rifle again, aiming darts at the creature's head. They glanced off the crystalline mask, having no effect, but the repeated impacts seemed to annoy the creature. It partially turned, its glowing eye fixing on Thorn, its taloned hand still pressed against the mammoth's icy prison. Key reached the crate, tearing it open. Her gloves fumbled with the clasps on the portable drill. It was heavier than she expected. Power pack, emitter nozzle. She activated it, the device humming to life with a low whine. She hefted the drill, its nozzle radiating noticeable heat even through her suit. She glanced back. The creature was advancing on Thorn now, ignoring the ineffective darts, raising its taloned hand. Samir charged forward with the wrench, aiming a blow at the creature's less crystallized knee joint. The creature reacted with contemptuous speed, backhanding Samir with its free arm. The blow wasn't merely physical. Intense cold radiated from the impact. Samir cried out, stumbling back, clutching his arm, frost instantly blooming across his suit where he'd been struck. Key ran forward, aiming the portable drill's nozzle. She couldn't get a clear shot at the joints from this angle without hitting Thorn. The creature's back was to her, its attention focused on the downed Samir and the retreating Thorn. Its connection to the mammoth seemed paramount. The crystalline veins pulsing across the giant beast glowed ever brighter. Decision made, not the creature, the connection. Key lunged towards the mammoth, aiming the thermal drill not at the crystalline humanoid, but at the point on the mammoth's flank where the creature's hand rested, where the energy seemed most focused. She jammed the nozzle against the ancient, crystalline-fused ice and pulled the trigger. An intense beam of heat bored into the ice. Steam exploded outwards. The resonant hum spiked into an ear-splitting shriek of synthesized agony, coming from both the creature and, impossibly, from the depths of the mammoth itself. The creature whirled around, its single blue eye blazing with furious energy. Detaching its hand from the now boiling, steaming hole Key was drilling. It raised its taloned hand, no longer ignoring her. Ice shards, needle-sharp and driven by terrifying force, erupted from its palm, hurtling towards Key. She tried to twist away, but there wasn't time. Pain, sharp and colder than anything she'd ever imagined, lanced through her shoulder as several shards punched through her suit, embedding themselves deep in her flesh. She cried out, falling backward, dropping the thermal drill. It skittered across the ice, its beam still firing, carving a useless scar towards the cavern ceiling before sputtering out as its safety cutoff engaged. Key landed hard, the impact jarring through her body. Her vision swam. Through the haze of pain, she saw the creature advancing on her, its taloned hand raised for a final blow. Behind it, the mammoth groaned again, a sound that shook the very foundations of the cavern, and the crystalline veins across its surface pulsed with erratic, uncontrolled light. Then another sound, from the main access tunnel, a heavy, dragging scrape. Thorn and Samir, momentarily forgotten by the creature, looked towards the entrance. Another figure stood there, not ancient this time, clad in the tattered remnants of an expedition thermal suit. Crystalline growths covered most of its body, integrating the fabric, the equipment, into its structure. Its face was entirely hidden behind a mask of pulsating blue crystal, but the shape, the build, it was unmistakable. Ben Carter, or what was left of him, had arrived, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, figures shuffled, encased in shimmering ice cocoons, barely humanoid, their features lost to the crystalline transformation. Nodes for the structure. The first creature paused its attack on Key, turning its head towards the newcomers. The resonant hum shifted, intertwining, creating complex, dissonant harmonies. Ben, or the thing using his body, raised a hand, pointing not at Key, Thorn, or Samir, but directly at the mammoth. A new phase of integration was about to begin. Key lay helpless on the ice, cold fire spreading from the shards in her shoulder, watching the two crystalline nightmares converge on the ancient beast at the heart of the glacier. Chapter 7: Convergence. The cavern air grew thick with competing resonant frequencies. The deep, steady hum of the ancient crystalline creature intertwined with the slightly higher, more complex thrum emanating from the construct that had once been Ben Carter. The combined sound pressed down, creating a disorienting pressure in Key Sharma's skull, making rational thought slippery, elusive. Cold radiated from the ice shards embedded in her shoulder, a burning numbness that crept insidiously along her nerves, down her arm, towards her chest. Her vision pulsed at the edges. Neither crystalline figure acknowledged the other directly. Their attention, unified yet separate, remained locked onto the colossal mammoth trapped in its icy prison. The ancient creature stood near the mammoth's flank, where Key's desperate thermal drill attack had left a steaming, ragged hole. Ben, Key forced herself to use the name, a futile anchor to the man he was, approached the mammoth's massive head, near the intact tusk. The other figures, the vaguely humanoid shapes encased in shimmering ice cocoons that had followed Ben from the tunnel, shuffled to a halt behind him, silent, motionless sentinels. Their forms were indistinct, blurred by the crystalline shells, suggesting incomplete or ongoing integration. Ben, Thorne's voice was hoarse, pleading. He stumbled forward a few steps, rifle hanging uselessly at his side. Ben, listen to me, fight this thing. What are you doing? The Ben construct didn't turn. Its head, completely encased in the pulsating blue crystal mask, remained oriented towards the mammoth's skull. When it spoke, the voice was the same resonant monotone, layered over the hum, seeming to issue from the air around it rather than a distinct mouth. Benjamin Carter is integrated, stabilized. His patterns contribute to the structure. Structure? What structure? Thorne demanded, desperation making him reckless. You're killing people, Lena. What did you do to Lena? Petrova is processing, the voice responded, devoid of inflection. Her integration proceeds. She will join the structure. Stability requires cohesion. It raised its hand, the one still resembling a gloved human hand, though crystalline veins were visible beneath the fabric. It pressed its palm against the ice encasing the mammoth's forehead. Simultaneously, the ancient creature pressed its taloned hand back onto the mammoth's flank, near the damaged area. The moment both beings made contact, the effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The entire mammoth form convulsed within its icy tomb. Not a simple tremor, but a deep, shuddering muscle contraction, impossibly strong after millennia of stasis. The crystalline veins crisscrossing the ice flashed with blinding intensity, the competing hums merging into a single, overwhelming chord that resonated through the cavern, shaking dust and ice particles from the ceiling. A low, guttural groan, impossibly deep and filled with ancient, frozen breath, seemed to tear its way out of the mammoth's throat, vibrating the very air. Samir Khan, who had pushed himself up against the generator, clutching his frostbitten arm, cried out, "It's alive! Gods, it's making it alive!" Key watched, helpless, the cold from the shards spreading. It wasn't just numbness now, it felt like her own tissues were stiffening, crystallizing from within. Her thoughts felt sluggish, fragmented, parasite, cryovermes, replicating via host biomatter, prion-like protein folding, energy transfer, stabilization, integration. The analytical terms provided no comfort, only stark terror. The shards weren't just inert projectiles, they were seeds. They were actively working on her, trying to add her to the structure. She had to get them out. She tried to reach her injured shoulder with her good arm, but the movement sent waves of agony and stiffening cold through her body. Her fingers barely responded, clumsy and slow. The mammoth groaned again, a louder, more resonant sound. Its massive head shifted slightly within the ice, infinitesimal movements, but undeniably purposeful. One of its huge, curved tusks scraped against the interior of its crystalline prison with a sound like grinding stone. "We have to stop them," Thorne yelled, seemingly snapping out of his shock. He looked wildly around, his eyes landing on the heavy equipment cases near the cavern wall. "The drills, if we can disrupt the ice around them." Before he could move, the Ben construct turned its head slowly towards him. The blue light within its crystalline mask intensified. Inefficient action. Resistance is futile. The primary node requires activation. It lifted its hand from the mammoth's forehead and pointed towards Thorne. The air between them seemed to solidify. Thorne gasped, clutching his chest, his face contorting in pain. He stumbled backward, thick frost instantly blooming across the front of his thermal suit, spreading with horrifying speed. He collapsed onto the ice, convulsing, his limbs stiffening as the crystalline frost consumed him. Within seconds he was encased, a statue of instant, aggressive ice formation, his expression of agony frozen beneath the glittering shell. "Aris!" Samir screamed, scrambling away from the generator, his eyes wide with horror. The Ben construct lowered its hand, its attention returning to the mammoth. The ancient creature beside it hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to Thorne's demise, its focus solely on channeling energy into the mammoth. The giant beast shuddered again, more violently this time. Cracks began to appear in the super-hard crystalline ice encasing it, not from melting, but from the sheer internal force being exerted. Key knew she had moments. The cold was reaching her core, her thoughts becoming dreamlike, detached, focus. What had been the real Ben prioritized? Safety, protection. What was the antithesis of this crystalline structure? Chaos, heat, instability, the melt. The melt. Her eyes fixed on the steaming hole she had drilled into the mammoth's flank with the portable thermal device. The creature had recoiled from it. Ben, the construct, had called heat inefficient. The geothermal vent. Ben had sought it out, but the parasite seemed to use its energy in a controlled way for integration. Uncontrolled heat, rapid melting. That was the enemy. She looked towards Samir. He was backed against the cavern wall, staring in terror at the frozen form of Thorne and the two crystalline beings working on the mammoth. his calm unit. Could she reach him? Samir, she forced the name out, her voice raspy, weak. The effort sent jolts of cold pain through her. Samir, the main drill, thermal lance, overload. Samir looked at her, his face pale, uncomprehending for a moment. Then realization dawned. The main thermal lance, the large one used to bore the access tunnel, was powered by the generator he stood near. Its emitter was damaged, frozen by the ancient creature, but the power source, if it could be overloaded. Hope, fragile but sharp, pierced through Key's growing mental fog. Samir understood. He looked at the generator, then at the advancing crystallization of the mammoth, then back at Key, a desperate resolve hardening his features. He nodded slowly, then scrambled towards the generator controls, keeping low, trying to stay out of the Ben construct's line of sight. The Ben construct seemed preoccupied, placing its hand back on the mammoth's forehead. The ancient creature beside it emitted a series of rapid, high-pitched clicks, almost like insectoid communication, directed towards the groaning beast. The cracks in the mammoth's icy prison widened, revealing glimpses of dark, hairy hide beneath. The air pulsed with power. Key tried to push herself up, needing to see, needing to help Samir if she could. The movement aggravated the shards. An image flashed in her mind, not a memory but a feeling, an understanding flowing from the spreading crystals within her. A sense of connection, structure, order, the beauty of perfect cold preservation, the inefficiency of warmth, of individuality, of messy, uncontrolled life. A deep, seductive pull towards stillness, towards joining the silent, crystalline chorus. No, she fought against it, focusing on the pain, on the image of Thorn frozen solid, on Lena trapped somewhere in the dark. She clawed at the ice shards in her shoulder with numb fingers, needing to remove the source, the connection point. One broke off, sending a fresh wave of agony but also a momentary surge of clarity. She looked towards the mammoth. The Ben construct and the ancient creature seemed to be locked in their task, pouring energy into the awakening beast. The other frozen figures behind Ben remained inert. Samir was frantically working at the generator panel, bypassing safety protocols, rerouting power. Sparks flew from the console. Then the Ben construct paused. It lifted its head slightly, tilting it, not towards Samir, but towards the ceiling, towards the surface far above. The resonant hum faltered for a fraction of a second. External energy source detected, the resonant voice stated, a new note entering its monotone, something almost like interest. Significant, uncontrolled thermal event approaching. Key didn't understand. What external source? Then she remembered. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the geothermal specialist, monitoring the glacier's stability, the melt rate, the underlying volcanic activity. Had the seismic events, the energy discharges from the cavern, triggered something on the surface? A feedback loop. Was the glacier's own accelerating melt becoming the weapon they needed? Before she could process the thought, the ground beneath them didn't just groan, it heaved. A powerful tremor, far stronger than any before, shook the cavern violently. Ice blocks rained down from the ceiling. A huge fissure cracked open across the cavern floor, narrowly missing the generator where Samir worked. The mammoth roared, a true, bellowing sound of agony and power, its entire body convulsing within the cracking ice. The Ben construct and the ancient creature staggered, momentarily losing their connection to the beast. The crystalline cocoons behind Ben remained standing, unaffected by the tremor, rigid as statues. Samir seized the moment. With a final, desperate manipulation of the controls, he threw himself away from the generator just as it erupted. Not with an explosion of fire, but with a contained, violent surge of pure energy back through the sabotaged thermal lance conduit. The frozen emitter glowed incandescent white for a split second, then detonated with the force of a small bomb, sending superheated gas and molten metal fragments spraying across the cavern. The blast wave hit the ancient creature directly, engulfing it in thermal fury. It shrieked, a sound that tore at the fabric of reality, staggering back as its crystalline structure buckled and melted under the intense, uncontrolled heat. The Ben construct further away was shielded partially by the mammoth. It turned, its crystalline mask cracking under the force of the blast, revealing a horrifying glimpse of the frozen, blue-tinged face beneath Ben Carter's features, locked in a serene, inhuman expression. It raised its arm, not in attack, but defensively towards the expanding fireball. And from above, the sound wasn't dripping anymore. It was a roar, the roar of water, tons of meltwater, freed by the escalating geothermal activity and the seismic shock, plunging down from breached conduits high in the glacier. A deluge heading straight for the cavern. Heat from below, water from above. Chaos unleashed. Key lay on the ice, bleeding, freezing, fighting the parasite's insidious pull, watching the structure's heart face imminent destruction. Chapter 8: Deluge and Dissolution. Chaos erupted in the heart of the glacier. The generator's detonation sent a shockwave tearing through the cavern, followed by a blast of incandescent heat. The ancient crystalline creature shrieked, engulfed in the thermal pulse, its form visibly degrading, melting and cracking like superheated glass. It stumbled backward, flailing its taloned arms, shedding burning, molten shards of its own structure. Simultaneously, the roar from above intensified into a deafening cascade. Not drips, not streams, but a solid curtain of frigid meltwater plunged through newly opened fissures in the cavern ceiling, crashing onto the ice floor with titanic force. It struck near the center of the cavern first, a churning, debris-filled waterfall that hit the weakened ice floor where the seismic tremor had opened cracks. The floor shattered inwards, collapsing into a newly formed, roiling subglacial lake or channel beneath. The Ben construct, shielded from the worst of the initial blast by the mammoth's bulk, reacted instantly. Its cracked crystalline mask turned towards the roaring deluge. The resonant hum shifted again, becoming a tight, defensive frequency. It raised both hands, not towards the heat, but towards the cascading water. Crystalline energy pulsed outwards, attempting to freeze the torrent, to impose structure on the chaos. For a moment, massive icicles formed midair, battling the immense pressure of the flood, but the volume and force of the meltwater were overwhelming. The ice formations shattered almost as quickly as they formed. The ancient creature, still reeling from the thermal blast, was struck by the edge of the main deluge. The impact of freezing water against its superheated, damaged form was catastrophic. With a final, ear-splitting crack that echoed above the roar of the water. It shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments, consumed by the churning floodwaters that now rapidly filled the cavern floor, swirling around the collapsing central pit. Water surged across the cavern floor, rising rapidly, carrying chunks of ice and rock. It reached Key Sharma, frigid water shocking her system, momentarily clearing the encroaching fog from her mind. The cold was absolute, but it was the cold of water, of chaos, fundamentally different from the structuring cold of the parasite. The water swirled around her, pulling at her, threatening to drag her towards the central collapse. She gasped, sputtering, trying to keep her head above the rising tide. The shards in her shoulder throbbed, the parasite within her seeming to recoil from the turbulent water. Samir Khan had been thrown clear of the generator blast but landed hard near the cavern wall. He pushed himself up, soaked and shivering, his frost-bitten arm hanging uselessly. He stared wide-eyed at the rising water, the collapsing floor, the disintegrating ancient creature. The Ben construct ignored the dissolving elder being. Its focus remained on the mammoth and self-preservation. The floodwaters surged around its legs, but it stood firm, anchored by the crystalline growths integrating its boots with the ice floor. Its connection to the mammoth seemed to give it immense stability. The giant beast itself roared again, thrashing within its cracking ice prison as the floodwaters rose around its base, dissolving the lower layers of its crystalline tomb. It wasn't breaking free, it was being eroded. The inert, cocooned figures behind the Ben construct were caught by the flood. Less integrated, less stable, they were torn from their positions, tumbling into the rising water like grotesque buoys, their crystalline shells cracking and dissolving in the turbulent flow. Within moments, they vanished beneath the churning surface. The Ben construct seemed to register their loss, its head twitching slightly. The resonant hum faltered, losing its focus for a split second. It was adapting, recalculating, facing multiple threats: heat, flood, structural collapse. Key saw her chance. The water was rising fast, already waist-deep where she lay. The cold was lethal, but it was also washing away the immediate influence of the shards, diluting the parasite's grip. She kicked weakly, trying to propel herself away from the central collapse, towards the relatively intact cavern entrance tunnel. Her injured shoulder screamed in protest, but the adrenaline of survival surged through her. Samir saw her movement, saw the same desperate hope. He pushed himself off the wall, wading through the icy water towards her. "Key, this way," he yelled over the roar. The Ben construct registered their movement. Its head snapped towards them. The cracked mask revealed more of the face beneath, still serene, still Carter's features, but utterly alien. It took a step towards them, fighting the powerful current. Nodes must remain. Integration incomplete. Structure requires. Its words were cut off as another section of the ceiling collapsed directly above the mammoth, showering the beast and the construct in ice blocks and water. The mammoth bellowed, a sound of pure, primal agony, and with a final, titanic heave, it partially broke free from the dissolving ice. Its massive forelegs churned in the rising water, its trunk flailing. It wasn't consciously fighting. It was reacting with instinctual panic to the sudden, violent release and the crushing flood. One of its massive, flailing tusks swept sideways, catching the Ben construct unprepared. The impact threw the crystalline figure off balance, sending it stumbling backward into the deeper water near the central collapse. It vanished beneath the churning surface for a moment, the resonant hum cutting out abruptly. "Now!" Samuel screamed, reaching Key. He grabbed her good arm, hauling her upright in the chest-deep water. "To the tunnel, move!" Together, fighting the current, hampered by Key's injury and Samuel's frostbite, they struggled towards the access tunnel entrance. The walkway Ben had warned them about earlier was partially submerged, tilted precariously, but it was their only way out of the main cavern. The water level seemed to stabilize slightly, the initial deluge lessening, but the cavern was irrevocably transformed into a turbulent, freezing lake, draining into the chasm that had opened in its center. They reached the base of the walkway. Samuel shoved Key forward onto the slippery metal. "Climb, don't stop." Key scrambled onto the grating, her limbs numb, her movements clumsy. She looked back. The mammoth was thrashing violently in the center of the cavern, trapped between the remaining ice, the flood, and the pit, slowly being pulled towards the abyss. Then a figure surfaced near the edge of the central collapse. The Ben construct. Water streamed off its crystalline form. Its mask was shattered completely now, revealing the whole of Ben Carter's face, blue-tinged, eyes glowing with cold light, expression utterly serene and focused. It had lost its weaponized arm, the ice talons were gone, likely shattered in the underwater turbulence. But it was functional. It locked its luminous gaze onto Key and Samuel on the walkway. It began wadding towards them, pushing against the current, its movements stiff but implacable. "It's coming," Key yelled, trying to climb faster. Samuel scrambled onto the walkway behind her. He looked back at the advancing construct, then down at the turbulent water. His face was a mask of grim determination. "Go, Key. Get to the cage. Warn the surface." Samuel, no. He didn't listen. He turned back towards the Ben construct, planting his feet firmly on the submerged grating. He ripped a tangled power conduit, sparking and frayed from the generator explosion from where it had snagged on the walkway railing. He held the live, sparking end like a weapon. "You want structure," he screamed at the advancing figure, his voice raw. "Here's some chaos for you, you crystalline bastard." The Ben construct paused, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly, assessing the threat. It continued its advance, slower now, raising its remaining hand. Samuel waited until it was almost upon him, wading through the chest-deep water. Then, with a final look towards Key climbing the walkway into the tunnel, he plunged the sparking conduit into the water directly in front of the construct. The effect was immediate. Electricity arced violently through the water, illuminating the cavern in flickering blue-white flashes. The Ben construct convulsed, its crystalline structure acting as a massive conductor. The resonant hum spiked into a discordant shriek. Its body locked rigid, steam erupting from its joints as the current surged through it. Its serene expression twisted into a silent rictus of overload. Samuel was caught in the edge of the electrical field. He cried out, his body arching backward before collapsing into the electrified water, sinking beneath the surface without another sound. Key reached the tunnel entrance, hauling herself out of the water onto the blessedly solid ice floor within. She looked back just in time to see the Ben construct finally succumb. Its internal light flickered, then died. The crystalline structure seemed to lose cohesion, dissolving rapidly, becoming dull like wet sand. The current dissipated. The figure slumped, lifeless beneath the water, vanishing into the murky depths near the central chasm where the mammoth still fought its losing battle. Silence, apart from the receding roar of the water and the groans of the dying glacier, fell over the cavern. Thorn was frozen. Samir was gone. Lena was lost. Ben, dissolved. The ancient creature shattered, the mammoth drowning. Key pushed herself to her feet, shivering uncontrollably, pain and cold vying for dominance. She looked at the ice shards still embedded in her shoulder. The cold radiating from them felt, weaker now, less directed. The central intelligence, the structure's core influence in the cavern, seemed broken, disrupted by the flood and the electricity. But the shards were still there, still alien, still part of her. She had to get out, back to the cage, back to the surface, back to warn them, because whatever this thing was, its influence might not be limited to one cavern beneath a melting glacier. This might only be the beginning. Clutching her injured shoulder, Ki Sharma began the long, painful climb back up the access tunnel, leaving the flooded, chaotic tomb behind her. Chapter 9: Shards and Ascent. The access tunnel was a tube of echoing silence, punctuated only by Ki Sharma's ragged breathing and the slosh and drip of receding floodwater. The main deluge had subsided, but the lower section of the tunnel remained slick with a treacherous layer of refrozen slush and runoff, making every upward step an exercise in agonized caution. Her boots, designed for traction on solid ice, skidded unpredictably on the wet, uneven surface. Pain was a constant, radiating from her injured shoulder in waves of fire and ice. The embedded crystalline shards pulsed with a cold that felt deeper than the ambient temperature, a penetrating chill that stiffened her muscles and seemed to leach the strength from her limbs. It wasn't the aggressive, structuring cold she'd felt when the crystalline creatures were active, but a more insidious, parasitic chill, a foreign presence clinging stubbornly within her own tissues. Her arm hung almost uselessly at her side, movement restricted by both the physical wound and the unnatural rigidity spreading from the shards. She climbed, one step then another. Using her good arm, she clung to the smooth tunnel wall for balance, her glove scraping against the ice. The portable lighting strips that had illuminated their descent flickered intermittently, some completely dark, damaged by the seismic shocks or the power surge from the generator explosion. Long stretches of the tunnel were lit only by the narrow beam of her helmet lamp, bouncing off the wet, reflective surfaces, creating confusing shadows that danced like phantoms at the edge of her vision. Thoughts fragmented, images assaulted her, Thorn's face contorting as the frost consumed him, Samir's final, defiant act before vanishing into the electrified water, Ben's serene, inhuman face behind the shattered crystal mask, Lena's panicked voice over the comms, then the resonant monotone, the mammoth's dying roar. Grief and terror threatened to overwhelm her, but the cold clarity forced by the parasite shard, even weakened, seemed to compartmentalize the emotions, locking them behind a wall of survival instinct. Move, climb, escape. The imperative echoed, a remnant of the structure's influence, now ironically serving her own survival. She paused, leaning heavily against the tunnel wall, gasping for breath. Her breath plumed out, thick and white. She risked a glance at her shoulder. The torn fabric of her suit was stiff with frozen blood and meltwater. Beneath it, the skin around the embedded shards had taken on a faint, definite bluish tint, like a deep bruise but translucent, almost crystalline. The cold wasn't just a sensation, it was a physical change beginning. "Get them out." She fumbled inside her med-kit pouch with her good hand, fingers clumsy with cold and lack of dexterity. The kit itself was soaked, some supplies ruined. She found a pair of heavy forceps. Bracing herself against the wall, gritting her teeth against the anticipated agony, she tried to grasp the protruding end of the largest shard. Her hand trembled violently. The forceps skittered off the slick, hard surface of the crystal. She tried again, managing a precarious grip. She pulled. Pain exploded behind her eyes, white-hot and freezing cold simultaneously. A guttural cry tore from her throat. The shard didn't budge easily. It felt rooted, integrated into muscle and tendon. She pulled harder, desperation lending strength. With a sickening, grating sound, the shard came free, trailing strands of frozen tissue. She almost blacked out. Her vision swam. She leaned her helmet against the icy wall, fighting for consciousness. The wound bled sluggishly, the extreme cold staunching the flow but doing nothing for the damage beneath. Looking at the shard held in the forceps, intricate, geometric, faintly luminous, she felt a wave of revulsion and a strange, terrifying sense of loss. A whisper in the back of her mind, a remnant of the structure's harmony, mourned the broken connection. She dropped the shard onto the ice floor where it glittered accusingly under her lamp. Two more remained embedded deeper. Could she endure removing them? Could she afford not to? The spreading stiffness, the blue tint. She was running out of time before the changes became irreversible, even without the network's active influence. She forced herself onward. The climb grew steeper. She passed the 50-meter mark, then 75. The ice underfoot became drier, less affected by the floodwaters that had primarily inundated the lower cavern and tunnel section. Progress became fractionally easier, but her strength was failing. The initial adrenaline surge had faded, leaving behind profound exhaustion, pain, and the creeping, insidious cold from the remaining shards. Her mind drifted. She saw fractal patterns overlaying her vision, snowflake geometries expanding and contracting. She heard faint, resonant harmonies weaving through the silence, echoes of the structure's song. Were they real or hallucinations brought on by trauma, hypothermia, and the parasite's influence? She couldn't tell. She shook her head fiercely, trying to clear the sensory ghosts. Focus. Cage. Surface. 100 meters. She recognized the slight curve in the tunnel, remembering the descent, almost there. Hope provided a small, flickering warmth. She pushed harder, ignoring the screaming protest of her shoulder, the leaden weight of her limbs. The tunnel opened slightly ahead. She saw the faint glow spilling out from the main descent shaft, the vertical abyss they had entered what felt like a lifetime ago. She saw the dark shape of the access cage, still docked against the narrow metal walkway. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. She stumbled forward onto the walkway grating. Her boots clanged loudly, the sound alien after the muffled silence of the tunnel. The vastness of the main shaft yawned below, filled with darkness and the faint whisper of falling ice particles. The cage, safety, escape. She reached the heavy mesh door. It was closed, locked from the outside just as Ben had left it. Her heart sank. The external lock mechanism required leverage, strength she wasn't sure she possessed with only one functional, exhausted arm. She examined the mechanism under her lamp, standard heavy-duty locking bar. She wedged the tips of her good fingers under the handle, straining. The bar didn't move. Frozen solid, or just too heavy, she leaned her body weight against it, grunting with effort. Pain flared in her shoulder, threatening to overwhelm her. The bar shifted, just a fraction, with a screech of protesting metal. She paused, breathing heavily, gathering her strength. Then she noticed something on the walkway grating near the cage door, something partially obscured by a dusting of ice powder shaken loose from the shaft ceiling. A tool. A geological hammer, standard issue, but not hers, not Ben's, Lena, or Thorn. She leaned closer, her lamp beam illuminating it fully. It was Lena's. She recognized the distinctive fluorescent tape Lena wrapped around her tools for visibility. And next to it, almost invisible against the dark metal, was a smear, dark, frozen. Key touched it gingerly with a gloved fingertip. Flakes came away. She brought them closer to her lamp. Reddish-brown, blood, not a lot but definitely blood. Lena had been here, after escaping Ben. Had she made it back this far only to be, what, taken again? By what? The ancient creature had come from the tunnel. Ben had followed later. Had Lena reached the cage, tried to open it and been recaptured? Or had she encountered something else emerging from the shaft? Key swept her lamp beam around the walkway, down into the shaft, up towards the surface winch assembly lost in the darkness above. Nothing. Just the immense, silent cold and the groaning sighs of the dying glacier. Renewed urgency surged through her. She had to get the cage open. She had to get to the surface. Not just for herself, but to find out what happened to Lena, to warn them. She jammed the head of Lena's geological hammer under the locking bar, using it as a lever. She put all her remaining strength, all her weight, into it. With a deafening crack, the ice sealing the mechanism broke. The locking bar screeched upwards, disengaging. The heavy cage door was unlocked. Key practically sobbed with relief. She pulled the grating door open. It moved stiffly on its hinges and stumbled inside the relative sanctuary of the cage. She collapsed onto the cold metal floor, her body shaking violently, reaction setting in. Safe, not yet. She reached for the internal winch controls, the communication panel. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, fumbled with the switches. Power lights flickered on. Good. The cage systems were operational. She activated the main comm unit, switching it to the surface frequency. Base camp, this is Sharma. Does anyone read? Repeat, Kailan Sharma calling base camp, respond. Only static answered. Thick, hissing static, occasionally punctuated by crackles and pops. The same interference that had plagued them earlier. Or something new. Base camp, respond. Kenji, Anya, anyone. She tried again, her voice strained. Static. Panic tightened its icy grip again. No comms. Alone. Injured. trapped hundreds of meters down in a dying glacier. She looked at the winch control lever. Could she operate it herself? Did she dare ascend without confirming the surface situation? What if something had happened up there too? The Ben construct's words echoed. External energy source detected. Uncontrolled thermal event approaching. Had the instability reached the surface? She looked down at her shoulder at the blue-tinged skin around the remaining shards. The cold pulsed faintly. The structure wasn't gone. Its seeds were inside her. What would happen to her during a long, slow ascent? What might she become before reaching the surface? Trapped below or potentially trapped above. Communications dead. An unknown fate for Lena. And the parasite dormant but present, ticking away inside her own flesh. Key Sharma leaned her head back against the cold steel mesh of the cage, the vast, indifferent darkness of the glacier pressing in from all sides. The escape was just the beginning of a new kind of horror. Chapter 10: Ascent into Silence. The cage was a tiny steel island adrift in a vertical ocean of darkness and cold. Key Sharma huddled on the floor, tremors racking her body, partly from the biting chill penetrating her compromised suit, partly from shock and exhaustion. The silence pressed in, immense and profound, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of static from the comm panel and the occasional mournful groan of the glacier adjusting its vast weight around the shaft. Pain was a constant, sharp counterpoint to the encroaching numbness. Her shoulder throbbed relentlessly where she'd torn the first shard free. The two remaining crystals pulsed with a cold that felt deeper, more integrated now, a parasitic presence coiling within her tissues. She could almost feel it, or perhaps she imagined it, tiny crystalline filaments spreading, anchoring, waiting. The temptation to simply stop, to let the cold take her, to achieve the structure's promised stability, whispered at the edges of her consciousness, a seductive, alien thought pattern warring with her instinct to survive. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the physical. Control what you can control. She needed to address the remaining shards. Delay meant allowing the parasite deeper purchase. With agonizing slowness, she maneuvered herself upright against the cage wall, retrieving the forceps dropped earlier. Her good hand shook, fingers stiff and unresponsive. She targeted the more accessible of the two remaining shards, lodged high on her shoulder near the collarbone. Steeling herself, she clamped the forceps onto its glittering, exposed edge. The moment metal touched crystal, a jolt, like static electricity but colder, shot up her arm. Her muscles spasmed involuntarily, nearly making her drop the tool. Resistance. The parasite, even weakened, even disconnected from the network, fought back on a cellular level. Gritting her teeth until her jaw ached, she clamped down hard and pulled. The pain was blinding, eclipsing the earlier removal. This shard was deeper, more entwined with nerve and muscle. She felt a tearing sensation, nauseatingly intimate. The whispering temptation intensified. Stop. Preservation. Stability is peace. No, she gasped, pulling with every ounce of strength, tears freezing on her cheeks. With a sickening schlick sound, the shard came loose. It was longer than the first, wickedly barbed at its base, trailing more ragged tissue. Black spots danced in her vision. She flung it away, hearing it clatter against the far side of the cage. One shard left. It was deeper still, closer to the joint, barely protruding. removing it here in her current state with clumsy tools and failing strength. The risk of causing catastrophic damage, of bleeding out, was too high. It would have to wait. Assuming there was a later. She slumped back, breathing hard, fighting waves of dizziness. The removal offered little relief. The cold from the final, deepest shard seemed to intensify, as if concentrating the parasite's remaining influence. The blue, translucent bruising around the wound sites was undeniably spreading. Her attention shifted to the comm panel. Static hissed relentlessly. It wasn't the intermittent crackle of atmospheric interference. It was a solid wall of white noise, dense and unchanging. She cycled through frequencies, emergency channels, local relays, even standard broadcast bands. Nothing but static. She checked the diagnostic display. Power levels to the comm unit were stable. Antenna connection secure. Signal transmission indicator lit, indicating the unit was broadcasting. But receiving, nothing. It wasn't just that no one was answering. It felt like nothing was getting through the noise, or perhaps like there was nothing left to receive. External power failure. The surface camp relied on generators, jamming. But who or what would jam signals up there? Or silence. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through her. What if the external thermal event the Ben construct mentioned wasn't volcanic but something else? Something that silenced the entire surface operation. She strained her ears, listening beyond the cage. The roar of the floodwaters below had subsided into a distant gurgle and echo, the sound of water finding new depths within the glacier's plumbing. But the shaft itself wasn't silent. The glacier groaned more frequently now, deeper, more resonant sounds, like a wounded beast shifting in pain. Trickles of meltwater ran down the shaft walls, more numerous than before, freezing into treacherous films or forming new icicles that occasionally broke free, shattering in the darkness below. The entire environment felt less stable, actively degrading. Then a new sound, faint, distant from far above. A rhythmic, mechanical clanking, intermittent, irregular. Was it the winch assembly adjusting to the glacier's shifts, or something else? Equipment operating or failing? It was impossible to tell. She looked at the winch control lever inside the cage. Ascent. Into that unknown silence, towards that ambiguous mechanical sound. Or stay here in the dark with the pain, the cold, and the parasite growing within her, waiting for the unstable shaft to collapse or the cage's power to fail. Lena's geological hammer lay on the floor near the door, the smear of frozen blood. Lena had made it this far. What stopped her? Had she tried to ascend alone? Had something intercepted her? He owed it to her, to Samir, to Thorn, to Ben, the real Ben, to find out. To warn someone if anyone was left to warn. The parasite whispered stay, preserve, wait, but the human imperative, weakened but not extinguished, screamed move, act, no. Decision made. With trembling fingers, Key reached for the main ascent lever. She hesitated for only a second, locking her gaze on the final shard embedded in her shoulder. You don't win. She pushed the lever forward. With a low hydraulic hum and a jolt that resonated through the floor, the cage began to move. Upwards. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the winch motor far above began its work, hauling the cage out of the depths. The irregular clanking sound from above grew marginally louder, more persistent. Key gripped the cage wall, bracing herself against the swaying motion. She peered out through the mesh, her lamp beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the passing shaft wall. Water streamed down the ice, carving glistening channels. Deep fractures spiderwebbed across the surface, testament to the recent seismic shocks. They passed the 100-meter mark, then 90. The ascent was steady, if unnervingly slow. The temperature inside the cage seemed to drop even further as they rose away from the residual geothermal influence of the lower levels. The cold from the shard in her shoulder pulsed sharply, a flare of discomfort that felt like a protest. 80 meters, 75. The clanking sound from above was definitely closer now, louder, more rhythmic. It wasn't the winch. It sounded like metal fatigue, something repeatedly striking metal. Key directed her lamp beam upwards, trying to pierce the gloom towards the surface assembly. She couldn't see the top yet, still too far, but she saw something else. On the shaft wall, about 10 meters above her current position, scrape marks, long, deep gouges in the ice accompanied by streaks of something dark, more blood, and tangled within the scrapes, snagged on a protruding ice formation. A shred of fabric, expedition issue thermal suit fabric. Her breath caught. Lena, she had tried to ascend or descend. What had happened here? As the cage continued its slow climb, approaching the 70-meter mark, Key kept her light fixed on the disturbing signs above. The rhythmic clanking grew louder, clearer. It was the sound of metal striking metal, sharp, percussive, desperate. Then another sound joined it, faint at first, barely audible over the winch and the clanking. A voice, shouting, distorted by the shaft acoustics, echoing strangely but undeniably human. "Out, let me out. Is anyone there? Help." Key's heart leaped. Alive, someone was alive up there. "Hello," Key yelled back, her voice hoarse, cracking. "Who's there? This is Sharma, I'm coming up." The shouting above stopped abruptly. The clanking ceased. A tense silence fell, broken only by the cage's ascent and the glacier's groans. Had they heard her? "Hello," Key called again, louder. "Identify yourself. Are you injured?" A different sound answered her. Not a voice. A low, guttural snarl echoing down the shaft from the darkness above. It was a sound utterly devoid of humanity, filled with primal hunger and cold rage. It was followed by a renewed, frantic bout of the metallic clanging, faster now, more desperate. Key stared upwards, her blood turning to ice water, the parasite shard in her shoulder pulsing with sudden, violent intensity, a flare of something that felt terrifyingly like recognition. The surface wasn't silent. It wasn't empty. Something was waiting in the darkness above, and it wasn't human. Chapter 11, Surface Tension. The snarl echoed down the shaft, a chilling counterpoint to the desperate, renewed clanging from above. Key Sharma pressed herself against the back wall of the slowly ascending cage, her helmet lamp aimed upwards, trying to penetrate the oppressive darkness. 60 meters to the surface, then 50. The cage crept upwards with agonizing slowness, each meter gained feeling like a mile. The parasite shard in her shoulder throbbed with a cold, insistent pulse. It wasn't pain exactly, but a focused intensity, a resonance that seemed tuned to the guttural sound that had echoed from above. It felt like a warning or perhaps an awakening. Her own body responded involuntarily, muscles tensing, skin prickling, the blue tint around the wound deepening fractionally. The alien presence within her recognized the threat above, and its reaction was primal, defensive. "Who's up there?" Key shouted again, forcing strength into her voice, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Answer me. What was that sound?" Only the frantic clanging answered, metal on metal, accompanied now by ragged, terrified sobbing. A man's voice pushed to the edge of hysteria. "Get away! No, stay back!" Then the snarl again, closer this time, sharp and vicious, followed by a sickening, wet tearing sound and a choked-off scream that cut through the mechanical noises before abruptly silencing. The desperate clanging stopped. Silence descended once more, heavy, absolute, terrifying. The only sound was the steady hum and crawl of the cage winch, pulling Key relentlessly towards the horror that had just unfolded above. Key's mind reeled. Someone had been alive up there, trapped, fighting something, and now, silence, that tearing sound. She didn't want to contemplate what it meant. 40 meters. 35. The top of the shaft was becoming dimly visible, lit by the faint, residual glow of emergency lighting spilling from the surface access structure built around the borehole. The main surface lights were clearly out. The cage continued its ascent, 20 meters. Key could now make out the details of the winch assembly directly overhead, a complex mechanism of gears, motors, and hydraulic lines mounted on a heavy steel frame spanning the borehole opening. And dangling from that frame, swinging slightly, was a safety harness. Empty. Severed lines hung limply from its buckles. 15 meters. The cage rose level with the bottom edge of the surface access structure, a prefabricated module designed to protect the borehole entrance from the elements and house essential equipment. Emergency lights within cast long, distorted shadows. The main entrance hatch, leading out onto the glacier surface, was visible on the far side. It was closed. 10 meters. Key could see inside the access structure now. It was chaos. Equipment overturned. Supply crates smashed open, contents scattered, and blood, streaks of it on the floor, smeared on the walls, glistening darkly under the emergency lights. A trail of bloody footprints, or perhaps claw prints, led towards the main exit hatch. 5 meters. The cage shuddered to a halt, locking into place at the surface docking level with a jarring clang. The ascent was over, but escape felt further away than ever. Key stared out through the mesh door at the scene of carnage. What had happened here? The surface team, Kenji Tanaka, the cautious geologist, Anya Volkova, the chief engineer, the support crew, where were they? Was the man sobbing and screaming one of them? What creature could have done this? She forced herself to move, her body stiff, protesting. She had to get out of the cage, assess the situation, find answers, find a way off this cursed glacier. She tried the cage door mechanism. Unlike the frozen lock below, this one responded to the internal release, the heavy grating sliding sideways. Stepping out of the cage onto the floor of the access structure felt like stepping into a charnel house. The air was frigid, carrying the metallic tang of blood and another scent, musky and feral. Her boots crunched on scattered debris, broken instruments, discarded ration packs, spent shell casings. Shell casings. She knelt, picking one up with numb fingers. Heavy caliber, shotgun slug. So they had fought back. Against what? Her lamp beam swept across the floor, following the bloody tracks. They weren't boot prints. Two large, oddly spaced, with deep indentations suggesting claws. They led towards the main hatch. She noticed something else near the hatch, a discarded radio handset, smashed beyond repair. The source of the silence. She approached the hatch cautiously. It was a heavy, insulated pressure door designed to withstand Arctic conditions. It was dented, scarred with deep scratches that looked like they were made by immense force, metal gouged and torn. But it was closed, seemingly sealed from the inside. Key listened intently, pressing her helmet against the cold metal. Silence. No snarling, no movement from the other side. Had the creature left, or was it waiting? Her gaze fell upon a dark shape slumped against the wall near the hatch controls. She approached slowly, her lamp beam trembling slightly. It was a body, or what was left of one, dressed in the remnants of an expedition thermal suit, savagely torn apart. The head was missing. Gore stained the wall and floor around it. Key recognized the build, the tattered remnants of the engineer's insignia on the sleeve. Anya Volkova. Key choked back bile, forcing herself to look away. She scanned the rest of the module. No other bodies visible in the main area. But the door to the small geological lab module where Kenji usually worked was ajar. Deep gouges scarred the door frame. She had to check. Armed with Lena's geological hammer, a pathetic weapon against whatever had done this, she pushed the lab door open wider. The lab was wrecked, equipment smashed, samples scattered, and in the corner, slumped over his instruments, was Kenji Tanaka. His eyes were wide with frozen terror, his throat ripped out. Claw marks raked across the console. He seemed to have been desperately working at even in his final moments. His fingers still rested on the keyboard. Key approached the console. The screen was shattered, but a secondary diagnostic display still glowed faintly. It showed seismic readings, thermal imaging feeds from deep within the glacier, and biosign readings. One graph spiked dramatically, labeled Unknown Aggressor Surface Proximity. Below it, another flatlined reading. Doctor. KTANAKA Life Signs TERMINATD. Kenji had been tracking it, trying to understand it even as it killed him. Key looked closer at the biosign data for the unknown aggressor. Hyperdense tissue readings, extreme metabolic rate fluctuations, and a thermal signature that was wrong. Not warm-blooded, not cold-blooded, but fluctuating wildly, radiating intense cold in bursts. Cold like the parasite. Key stepped back, horror dawning. Was the creature connected to the cryovermes? Was it another host, transformed differently? Or something else entirely, drawn by the parasite's energy signature, the glacier's instability? Her lamp beam caught something under Kenji's console. A data slate, miraculously undamaged. She picked it up. Kenji's last log entry, typed frantically moments before his death. Seismic cascade correlating with energy surge from cavern alpha. Structure collapse imminent. Unknown biosignal detected approaching surface camp simultaneously. Not expedition personnel. Large, aggressive, displays anomalous thermal properties radiating cold. Matches fragmented legends. Frost Father, no, something older, primal. It breached the outer perimeter. Anya down, calms out, trying to trigger emergency melt protocols. Bore channel destabilization. Flood cavern. Only way, it's at the door. Gods, it's. The entry ended there. Emergency melt protocols. Kenji had tried to trigger the flood deliberately, using controlled charges or thermal devices near the surface to breach subglacial water channels. He had tried to weaponize the glacier against the horrors below and the horror that had arrived on the surface. He had failed to stop the surface creature, but succeeded in triggering the deluge that had, perhaps coincidentally, saved Ki. She looked back towards the main hatch, sealed from the inside. Kenji or Anya must have sealed it before they died trying to trap the creature outside, but the creature was inside with them, which meant it hadn't come through the hatch. It had come from the borehole. It had climbed the shaft. Ki stared at the borehole opening, the dark abyss she had just ascended. The empty, swinging harness, the scrape marks, the blood. The creature hadn't been waiting outside the hatch. It had intercepted the screaming man, likely one of the support crew trying to escape via the emergency harness in the shaft. It had killed him, then climbed the rest of the way into the access structure, slaughtering Anya and Kenji. And now, where was it now? The structure was sealed, if it hadn't gone out the main hatch. Her eyes darted around the module. Ventilation shafts, equipment conduits. Were there other ways out onto the glacier surface, or was it still here, hiding, waiting? The parasite shard pulsed again, a cold spike of adrenaline. Her head snapped towards a large, shadowed equipment locker on the far side of the module. The locker door was slightly ajar, bent outwards at the bottom as if forced. Deep scratch marks, identical to those on the main hatch, marred its surface. It was hiding, or perhaps dormant, waiting, radiating cold. Ki backed away slowly towards the borehole cage, the geological hammer held ready. The silence felt infinitely more threatening now, charged with unseen, predatory intent. She had ascended from one nightmare only to surface into another, trapped in a sealed module with a monstrous killer of unknown origin, while the parasite slowly, inexorably continued its crystalline transformation within her own body. Chapter 12, Cold Fury. The silence in the access module was a living thing, thick with menace. Ki Sharma backed slowly towards the relative safety of the borehole cage, her eyes locked on the damaged equipment locker across the room. Every creak of the stressed structure, every distant groan from the glacier outside, sounded like the precursor to an attack. Her breath hitched in her throat, misting in the frigid air. The geological hammer felt absurdly inadequate. What good was a chunk of metal on a stick against something that could tear through steel hatches and rip bodies apart? Yet, she gripped it tightly, its familiar weight a small, desperate comfort. Her gaze swept the module again. Kenji's last log mentioned triggering emergency melt protocols, bore channel destabilization. Had he succeeded partially? Was the glacier outside becoming even more unstable? Could she use that? The main hatch was sealed, likely her only way out onto the surface, but opening it might mean confronting whatever was outside, assuming the creature was still inside the locker. if it had found another way out. She had to know what was in the locker. Waiting passively was suicide. Key forced her legs to move, circling wide around the locker, keeping maximum distance. She approached the side wall of the module, near where Anya's ravaged body lay. Bile rose in her throat again, but she suppressed it. On the wall panel here were manual overrides for the module's environmental controls, emergency lighting systems, and the main hatch release mechanism. A heavy lever, currently locked in the SCALED position. If she could reach the hatch, get it open, make a break for the surface. What then? The surface camp would be meters away across the ice, likely containing snow vehicles, maybe even a radio that hadn't been destroyed. But crossing that distance, exposed on the open glacier, with that thing potentially pursuing her. First things first, the locker. She moved parallel to the wall, her lamp beam steady on the slightly ajar locker door. The gap was narrow, maybe 6 inches at the bottom where it was bent outwards. Darkness lay within. No sound, no movement, but the air near it felt perceptibly colder, carrying that faint, feral musk she'd noticed earlier. Could she use the environment? Kenji's mention of thermal anomalies, radiating cold. She looked at the environmental control panel again. Emergency heating systems, designed to rapidly warm the module if primary power failed and temperatures plummeted. Could intense, sudden heat flush it out, or provoke it? Risky, extremely risky, but less risky than walking up and peering inside. Her good hand hovered over the emergency heat activation switch. It was shielded by a clear plastic cover. She flipped the cover up. Her fingers trembled. Do it. She slammed her palm down on the switch. Instantly, powerful heating elements embedded in the module's walls and ceiling roared to life. The low hum of dormant machinery became a loud thrum. Hot air blasted from vents, smelling of scorched dust. The temperature inside the confined space began to rise rapidly, creating billowing clouds of steam as it hit the icy surfaces and frozen blood. From within the locker came an immediate explosive reaction. A high-pitched, chittering shriek of agony and rage, utterly inhuman. The locker door flew open with violent force, torn from its upper hinge, slamming against the adjacent wall. A creature unfolded itself from the confined space, moving with blinding speed despite its apparent bulk. It was vaguely bipedal but hunched, standing perhaps 7 feet tall even in its crouch. Its limbs were too long, jointed at unnatural angles. Its hide was a pale, leathery gray, stretched taut over sharp, bony ridges, glistening with a layer of frost that instantly sublimated into steam in the sudden heat. Claws, thick and black as obsidian, tipped its fingers and toes, already scoring the metal floor as it emerged. But its head, Key recoiled, stumbling backward. It had no discernible face in the human sense. A smooth, sloped skull narrowed to a maw filled with rows of needle-sharp, backward-curving teeth. Where eyes should be, there were only empty, dark sockets, yet it tracked Key's movement perfectly, swiveling its head towards her with predatory certainty. And radiating from its entire body was an aura of intense cold, battling the emergency heaters, creating shimmering heat haze distortions around its form. It absorbed heat, using it, perhaps, to fuel its unnatural metabolism, while projecting a field of lethal cold. The creature shrieked again, clearly agonized by the sudden heat, and lunged, not at Key initially, but towards the nearest heating vent, tearing at it with its claws, trying to destroy the source of its discomfort. Metal screamed and tore as it ripped the vent cover from the wall. Key saw her chance. While it was distracted, enraged by the heat, she bolted for the main hatch control lever. She reached it, grabbing the heavy metal handle. Locked. She threw her weight against it, trying to force it downwards towards the open position. It wouldn't budge. A secondary locking mechanism, or damaged. The creature finished demolishing the vent. It whirled around, its faceless head fixing on Key at the hatch control. Its maw gaped, emitting a low growl that vibrated in Key's chest. The cold radiating from it intensified, pushing back against the artificial heat, causing frost to reappear on its leathery hide. It took a step towards her, claws clicking on the floor. Key fumbled desperately at the lever's base. A manual locking pin, jammed halfway. She yanked at it with numb fingers. It scraped, resisted, then slid free with a click. She grabbed the main lever again. The creature lunged, covering the distance between them in 2 terrifyingly fast strides. Its claws swiped where Key's head had been a split second before as she threw herself sideways, pulling down hard on the lever with all her might. The lever moved. Warning lights flashed. A klaxon, muffled by the module walls, began to sound outside. Pneumatic hisses echoed as the heavy pressure seals on the main hatch disengaged. The hatch itself didn't swing open. It was designed for external conditions, needing to be pushed outwards. The creature recovered instantly, turning towards Key as she scrambled away from the wall. It ignored the now unsealing hatch, its empty sockets fixed on her. It seemed to view her as the primary threat, the source of the heat, the disruption. It lowered its stance, gathering itself for another pounce. Key backpedaled, holding the geological hammer like a club. Useless. She scanned the room frantically. Weapons. Anything. Her eyes landed on the ravaged body of Anya Volkova. Something was still clipped to the remains of her belt. A flare gun. Standard expedition safety equipment. Heat. The creature hated heat. Key scrambled towards Anya's body, ignoring the gore, fumbling for the flare gun. Her fingers closed around its cold plastic grip. She ripped it free. The creature sprang. Key spun around, raising the flare gun, pointing it directly at the creature's gaping maw, and fired. The flare ignited with a blinding magnesium flash, hitting the creature square in the face at point-blank range. It shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, staggering backward, clawing at its faceless head. The intense heat and light overloaded its senses, burning its strange, heat-absorbing skin. Frost instantly vanished from its head and chest, replaced by smoking, charred patches. Key didn't wait. She scrambled to her feet and threw herself at the main hatch, pushing outwards with all her strength. It resisted for a moment, then swung open with a groan, revealing the blinding white expanse of the glacier surface under a gray, overcast sky. Wind whipped snow into the module. Freedom. She stumbled out onto the ice, squinting against the sudden brightness, gasping the clean, frigid air. Behind her, the creature's agonized shrieks continued from within the module. She risked a glance back. It was writhing on the floor, temporarily blinded and burned, but already its unnatural vitality was asserting itself. The charred patches were beginning to frost over again as its internal cold fought the lingering heat. It wouldn't be down for long. Key turned and ran, forcing her protesting legs into action. The surface camp, a cluster of tents and a larger operations module, was about 50 meters away across the windswept ice field. Snowmobiles were parked near the operations module, her only hope. She ran, slipping on patches of ice, driven by sheer terror. The wind cut through her torn suit, chilling her to the bone, but the cold felt clean compared to the parasitic chill radiating from the shards still lodged within her. Halfway to the camp, she heard it, a fresh roar of fury from the access module behind her. It was recovering, and it was coming. She didn't look back. She focused on the operations module on the snowmobiles, just a little further. Then she saw movement near the parked vehicles. Not the creature. Figures. Human figures bundled in expedition gear, emerging cautiously from the operations module, armed with rifles, alerted by the klaxon and the sounds of the fight. Alive, there were other survivors. "Help!" Key screamed, waving her good arm frantically. "Help me!" They saw her. They raised their rifles, aiming not at her but past her, towards whatever was pursuing her from the borehole access structure. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, threatened to buckle Key's knees again. She wasn't alone. She had reached safety. But as she got closer, staggering the last few meters towards the armed figures, she saw their faces behind their visors. Grim, suspicious. Their rifles remained trained past her, but their eyes were fixed on her torn suit, on the faint blue, crystalline bruising visible on her exposed skin around her neck and shoulder where the suit was ripped, on the subtle, unnatural rigidity in her movements caused by the final, embedded shard. One of the figures raised a hand, signaling her to stop, his rifle still aimed past her. His voice crackled over an external speaker, harsh and strained. "Hold it, right there, don't come any closer." Key skidded to a halt, confusion warring with relief. "What? It's me, Key Sharma. There's a creature. It killed Anya and Kenji." "We see it." The man's voice was tight with fear. "But we see you too. What happened down there? What the hell are you?" They weren't aiming past her anymore. At least one rifle barrel was now pointed directly at her chest. The parasite shard pulsed coldly, a flare of defensive energy rising within her, unbidden. Key stared at the survivors, at their terrified, accusing eyes, and realized with sickening certainty that her escape from the glacier's depths was far from over. She might have survived the structure and the creature, only to face the fear and suspicion of her own kind. Chapter 13. Pariah. The wind howled across the ice field, whipping snow into stinging particles that blurred the distance between Key Sharma and the armed survivors. 3 figures stood near the snowmobiles, rifles leveled, 2 pointed past her towards the borehole structure where the creature was presumably emerging, but one unwavering, aimed directly at her heart. Their faces, glimpsed through visors, were pale, strained, etched with terror and suspicion. "Identify yourselves," Key shouted over the wind, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. She recognized one figure, Gregor, a roughneck mechanic usually assigned to maintain the drilling equipment. The other two were likely from the secondary science team or support staff she hadn't interacted with closely. "Stay right where you are, Sharma," Gregor yelled back, his voice harsh, amplified by his suit speaker. He jerked his rifle slightly towards the borehole access module. "We know something came out of there, something else, but Kenji's last transmission, before everything went dead." He mentioned contamination, biological alteration, from whatever was down in that cave. His eyes, narrowed and fearful, flicked towards Key's injured shoulder, towards the visible blue crystalline bruising. "He mentioned you." Key's blood ran cold. Kenji had warned them about her, about the parasite. There was a parasite, she admitted, forcing the words out. Ancient in the ice, it infected Ben Carter, maybe Lena Petrova too. It changes you, preserves you, turns you into something else. She gestured desperately towards the borehole. "That thing in there, it might be connected or it might be something different, something older," Kenji mentioned. "It killed Anya and Kenji. I fought it. I barely escaped." "Maybe," Gregor spat back, unconvinced. "Or maybe you let it here. Maybe you're one of them now." He gestured with his rifle towards her shoulder. "What's that? Frostbite? Or are you turning crystalline like Carter supposedly did?" "It's a wound," Key insisted, feeling panic rise. "From the parasite shards, I pulled two out. One is still embedded. It's fighting me, but I'm still me." The shard pulsed again, a cold flare of energy contradicting her words, making her flinch. The other two survivors shifted uneasily, their rifles wavering between Key and the borehole structure. Behind her, a guttural roar echoed from the access module, closer now, angrier. The creature was out. "It's coming," one of the other survivors yelled, his voice high-pitched with panic. "Gregor, what do we do?" Gregor didn't lower his rifle from Key. His face was a mask of desperate calculation. She could be a Trojan horse. Let the creature reach her. See what happens. If she fights it, maybe she's telling the truth. If they ignore each other, or worse. "You'll use me as bait?" Key stared at him, incredulous. "After everything?" "Survival, Sharma," Gregor barked. "We lost half the team because Thorne and Carter went chasing glory down that hole. Kenji's dead, Anya's dead. We don't know what you are anymore. We can't take the risk." The creature emerged fully onto the ice field, its long-limbed, pale form stark against the gray sky. It paused, its faceless head swiveling, locating the humans. Steam rose from its hide where the flare had burned it, but it moved with fluid, predatory grace, seemingly unhindered. Its empty sockets fixed on the group near the snowmobiles, then flicked towards Key, standing isolated between them. It emitted a low, clicking growl, assessing the situation. "Shoot it," the panicked survivor screamed, firing his rifle prematurely. The shot went wide, kicking up snow far from the creature. The creature reacted instantly, not by charging, but by dropping low to the ice, its unnatural cold intensifying. Frost spread rapidly outwards from its feet, coating the glacier surface in a slick, expanding circle of rime. It was manipulating the environment, creating hazardous terrain. "Hold your fire. Wait for a clear shot," Gregor commanded, though his own rifle remained stubbornly aimed at Key. Key was trapped. The creature advancing from one side, suspicious, terrified survivors blocking her escape on the other. The parasite shard pulsed insistently, a cold fire spreading through her veins. An alien instinct whispered attack, defend, survive, absorb, integrate. It urged her towards the creature, suggesting a bizarre kinship, or towards the humans, suggesting dominance. She fought it down, clinging to her own identity. "Listen to me," she pleaded with Gregor, her voice desperate. "I am not the enemy, that thing is. We need to fight it together." The creature decided for them. With explosive speed, it launched itself across the ice, not directly at the main group, but angling towards Key, perhaps sensing her weakened state, or the strange energy signature radiating from the shard within her. Its claws scrabbled for purchase on the ice, propelling it forward with terrifying speed. "Fire!" Gregor roared, finally swinging his rifle away from Key towards the immediate threat. All three survivors opened fire. Rifle shots cracked through the wind, slugs impacting the creature's pale hide. It flinched, stumbled, its movements momentarily disrupted, but it didn't go down. Its hide, while not armored, seemed incredibly dense, absorbing the kinetic energy. The cold aura around it flared, attempting to counteract the impacts. It was still coming, straight towards Key. Instinct took over. Key threw herself sideways, scrambling away from its path, falling hard onto the ice. The creature shot past where she had been, its claws tearing furrows in the ice. It skidded, recovering its balance with unnatural agility, and whirled back towards her, its maw gaping. The survivors kept firing, their shots impacting its flank and back. It roared in pain and fury, momentarily distracted, swiping a clawed hand back towards the source of the shots, though the distance was too great. Key pushed herself up, geological hammer raised. It was now or never. Fight or die here between the monster and human fear. The shard pulsed violently, feeding cold energy into her system. Her injured arm felt strangely strong, the pain receding, replaced by icy resolve. "Use it," the alien whisper urged. "Defend the node." She ignored the whisper's source, focusing on the intent. Survive. She charged towards the creature as it turned back towards her, swinging the hammer with her good arm, aiming for its head. The creature reacted with contemptuous speed, batting the hammer aside with a casual swipe of its clawed hand. The impact jarred Key's arm to the socket, sending the hammer skittering away across the ice. It lunged, maw snapping, aiming for her throat. Key stumbled backward, dodging the lethal bite by inches. She felt the intense cold radiating from it, stealing the air from her lungs, frosting her visor. She was weaponless, off balance, directly in its path. Suddenly, the cold radiating from the creature seemed to lessen fractionally. It paused its attack, its faceless head tilting as if detecting something. The shard in Key's shoulder pulsed in response, a wave of intense, directed cold washing through her, originating from her. It wasn't painful this time, it felt like communication, a query and response on a frequency she couldn't consciously perceive. The creature shifted its stance, its empty sockets fixed on Key's shoulder, on the source of the energy. The immediate predatory intent seemed to fade, replaced by a focused, analytical curiosity. It cocked its head, emitting a series of low clicks, similar to the sounds the ancient crystalline being had made in the cavern. The survivors ceased firing, confused by the sudden standoff. "What's it doing?" one of them whispered. Key stood frozen, caught between the monster's scrutiny and the human's suspicion. The shard pulsed again, sending another wave of cold energy outwards. It felt like it was signaling, identifying itself, or perhaps identifying Key as a host, a potential asset, something other than mere prey. The creature took a hesitant step closer, not attacking but observing. Its maw closed slightly. It reached out a clawed hand slowly, not to strike, but as if to touch the pulsing shard through her suit. This connection, this silent, alien communication, terrified Key more than the physical attack. It confirmed her deepest fear. The shard wasn't just a piece of crystal. It was a living part of the parasite, capable of interacting with other entities, marking her as kin to the monstrosities the glacier hid. "No!" Key screamed, lashing out with her good foot, kicking at the creature's extended hand. Her boot connected, knocking the hand aside. The fragile truce shattered. The creature roared, enraged by the rejection, the interruption of its assessment. Predatory instinct surged back tenfold. It lunged again, faster than before, claws aimed directly at Key's chest, intending to rip the offending shard and Key's heart out. But the survivors reacted. Seeing the creature attack again, seeing Key fight back seemed to break through Gregor's suspicion, at least for the moment. "Light it up," he bellowed. Concentrated rifle fire slammed into the creature's side and back at close range. It roared, staggering, its lunge diverted just enough. Its claws raked across Key's chest, tearing through her suit but missing vital organs, the blow deflected by the force of the bullets. Key fell back, gasping, clutching her chest. Fresh pain flared, but the wound felt shallow. She looked up. The creature, riddled with bullets, finally seemed overwhelmed. It stumbled, its movements becoming jerky. The intense cold radiating from it flickered, weakened. It tried to turn back towards the survivors, towards Gregor, but its legs buckled. It collapsed onto the ice with a final, gurgling sigh, its unnatural vitality extinguished. A final wave of cold washed outwards from its corpse, frosting the ice around it, then dissipated. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Key pushed herself up, shaking. She looked at the dead creature, then at the three humans who stood panting, rifles smoking slightly, their expressions a mixture of shock, relief, and renewed suspicion as their gaze returned to her. Gregor took a cautious step forward, rifle still ready. "Okay, Sharma, maybe you are still human for now." His eyes lingered on the fresh tear across her chest, on the pulsing blue bruise beneath. "But that thing," it hesitated. "It seemed to recognize something in you." He gestured towards her shoulder. "You've got maybe 5 minutes to start explaining exactly what that thing in your shoulder is, and what it's doing to you, before we decide Kenji's warning was right after all." Standing alone on the ice, beside the corpse of one nightmare, facing the fear of her own kind, Key knew the fight for survival had just entered a new, more complicated stage. The cold within her pulsed, waiting. Chapter 14. The Long Cold. The wind scoured the ice field, pulling at the tattered edges of Key Sharma's thermal suit, relentlessly stealing warmth her body couldn't afford to lose. She stood shivering, not just from the external cold, but from the deep internal chill radiating from the final parasite shard lodged near her shoulder joint. Its rhythmic pulsing felt like a ticking clock, counting down the moments until— what? Full integration, loss of self. She didn't know, and that uncertainty was its own form of terror. Gregor and the other two survivors, Haynes and Petrovic, kept their distance, forming a loose semicircle, rifles still held at the ready. The immediate threat of the creature lay dead between them, its pale form already stiffening, dusted with drifting snow, yet the tension remained thick enough to taste. Their gazes flickered between Key and the corpse, their fear palpable. "Talk, Sharma," Gregor repeated, his voice tight, impatient. "What is that thing inside you? Why did that monster hesitate?" Key took a deep, ragged breath, the frigid air burning her lungs, explaining the inexplicable, justifying her continued existence to terrified men holding guns. Where did she even begin? "It's the parasite," she started, her voice hoarse. "The cryovermes Lena called it, microscopic, crystalline structure, organic components. It preserves biological matter through controlled freezing, integration." She gestured towards the dead creature. "That thing, I don't know what it was. Kenji's log called it older, primal. Maybe it's naturally occurring, maybe it's another form of host the parasite created ages ago. But the shard, it reacted. They communicated somehow. On a level I can't understand. It recognized the parasite in me." Haynes, the younger of the other two, shifted nervously. "Communicated, so you're linked to it, to whatever else might be out there." "No," Key insisted, though the cold pulsing within her felt like a traitorous affirmation. "I'm fighting it. It tries to influence, suggests thoughts, stability, preservation, joining the structure Ben mentioned. But it's weaker now, disconnected from the main network that was in the cavern, the flood, the electrical surge. It disrupted it, but the shard itself, it's still active, still trying to change me." She touched the torn fabric over her chest where the creature's claws had ripped through. "It gave me a burst of energy, cold energy, defensive, when the creature attacked." Petrovic, a burly man whose usual role involved maintaining the heavy drilling machinery, scowled. "So it helps you, makes you stronger, colder." "I don't know," Key admitted honestly. "Maybe, but at what cost? Look at Ben. Look at what happened to Thorn. It strips away everything human. I pulled 2 shards out. This last one, it's deep. I need proper medical equipment to remove it safely." She looked pointedly towards the operations module behind them. "Is the infirmary module intact? Is Dr. Hansen still?" Gregor cut her off with a shake of his head, his expression grim. "Hansen's gone. Took a snowmobile scout towards the coast yesterday morning before the storm hit, checking relay towers. Never came back. Radio silent since Kenji's last transmission." He nodded towards the operations module. "That building's cleared. We barricaded ourselves in when the borehole alarm went off and Kenji started shouting about bio-threats. Didn't see what happened to Anya or Kenji until we saw you fighting that thing. No doctor, no easy way to remove the final shard." Key's hope dwindled further. "What about the radio in there?" Key asked. "Is it working? Can we call for evacuation?" Gregor hesitated. "The main array is down. That thing likely tore up the external conduits when it first got here, but there's a portable satellite comm unit inside. Low bandwidth, emergency use only. We haven't tried it yet, didn't know who or what might answer. His suspicious gaze returned to Key. "We have to try," Key urged. "There might be other stations, ships, anyone who can hear us. We need extraction. This glacier, it's unstable." Kenji initiated melt protocols. The whole area could collapse, not to mention the potential for more horrors emerging from the depths or lurking on the surface. The three men exchanged uneasy glances. The immediate threat was dead, but Key, standing before them, wounded, contaminated, radiating a subtle but palpable wrongness, represented an unknown variable. "All right," Gregor finally decided, seemingly choosing the risk of external contact over internal uncertainty. "We try the SAT-COM, but you, Sharma, you stay outside, right here where we can see you. Haynes, Petrovic, keep your rifles on her and the borehole entrance. I'll make the call." Key nodded slowly, understanding their fear, hatting it, but seeing no alternative. She watched as Gregor warily backed towards the operations module door, his rifle still sweeping between Key and the access structure. Haynes and Petrovic repositioned themselves, finding cover behind parked snowmobiles, their weapons trained, dividing their attention between the potential threat she represented and the darkness of the borehole. Left alone in the vast, windswept emptiness, Key felt profoundly isolated. The creature's corpse lay nearby, a grotesque testament to the nightmare beneath the ice. The borehole structure stood like a tombstone for Anya and Kenji. The operations module, offering the only slim hope of rescue, held men who viewed her as a potential monster. And inside her the shard pulsed, cold, patient, waiting. The wind seemed to whisper forgotten names, echoes of the structure's song. She closed her eyes, trying to block it out, focusing on the sting of the cold on her exposed skin, the ache in her muscles, sensations that proved she was still alive, still human. For now. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The overcast sky darkened, signaling the approach of the long Arctic twilight. The temperature dropped further. Key's shivering intensified. The cold radiating from the shard seemed to offer a perverse kind of relief from the external chill, a dangerous internal warmth that felt like surrender. She forced herself to move, packing slightly, stamping her feet, generating friction, fighting both the external cold and the internal temptation. Finally, the door to the operations module opened again. Gregor emerged, his expression unreadable. He walked slowly back towards Haynes and Petrovic, keeping his distance from Key. "Well," Haynes demanded anxiously. Gregor shook his head. "Got through, barely. Weak signal, heavy atmospheric interference." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Caught relay via a Norwegian weather station north of Svalbard. Passed our coordinates, distress call, requested immediate evac." A flicker of hope ignited in Key. Did they respond? Are they sending help? Gregor looked directly at Key, his eyes hard. They responded, logged the call, but no promises on immediate evac. Extreme weather warnings across the sector. Unstable seismic activity. Our glacier isn't the only one acting up. And he hesitated again. They asked about the nature of the emergency. I told them. Catastrophic equipment failure, structural collapse imminent, casualties. You didn't tell them about the creature. About the parasite, Key asked, dread coiling in her stomach. What was I supposed to say, Sharma? Gregor shot back, his voice rising. That we've got ice monsters climbing out of the glacier and potentially infected personnel. They'd quarantine the whole sector, write us off, bury us under bureaucratic bullshit until we all froze or starved or, he gestured towards her shoulder, changed. He took another breath, calming himself slightly. Our best chance is a standard rescue op for a expedition disaster. Get picked up, get to civilization. Then we figure out how to explain the rest. He looked at Key pointedly. And how to deal with complications. The implication was clear. They wouldn't risk revealing the true nature of the horror or Key's condition until they were safely away. And her fate then, unspoken, uncertain. How long? Key asked quietly. Could be 12 hours, could be 48, could be never if the weather turns worse or this whole ice sheet decides to fall apart before then, Gregor said bluntly. We wait, we watch, we survive. He looked towards the operations module. We've got rations, heat, shelter in there. You stay out here. Out here, Key echoed, incredulous. I'll freeze to death. My suit is torn. I'm injured. Maybe that parasite thing will keep you warm, Gregor retorted, his fear making him cruel. We can't risk you being inside with us, not until we know what you'll become. Haynes and Petrovic nodded grimly in agreement. Key stared at them aghast, abandoned, left to the elements while the parasite worked its slow, crystalline transformation within her. It was a death sentence, just slower than a bullet. The shard pulsed. This time the feeling wasn't communication or defense. It felt like satisfaction, isolation, cold, the perfect conditions for preservation, for integration. Her own fear, her own despair seemed to feed it, strengthening its cold hold. She looked from the hostile faces of the survivors towards the dark borehole structure, then at the dead creature, then back at the men who were her only hope, yet also her captors. She was caught in the long, cold waiting game, and the enemy wasn't just the creature or the glacier. It was the fear in human eyes, and the relentless, patient parasite crystallizing her soul from within. Chapter 15, Thaw. Hours crawled by under the bruised twilight sky, the darkness deepening into the long Arctic night, broken only by the weak emergency lights from the operations module and the stark beam of Key Sharma's own helmet lamp. The wind lessened slightly, but the temperature plummeted further, reaching lows that tested the limits of even undamaged thermal suits. For Key, clad in torn, blood-stiffened gear, it was torture. She huddled near the carcass of the creature, seeking meager shelter from the wind behind its bulk. The irony wasn't lost on her, finding refuge beside the monster that had tried to kill her, abandoned by the humans she'd tried to save. She had stopped shivering violently, a dangerous sign, indicating her body was losing the battle against hypothermia, conserving energy, shutting down. Yet she wasn't freezing in the conventional sense. The parasite shard, lodged deep near her shoulder joint, pulsed with a steady, insistent cold that permeated her entire being. It counteracted the external chill, preventing lethal freezing but replaced it with its own alien state of being. The blue, crystalline bruising had spread, covering her entire shoulder and upper arm, creeping up her neck, visible even in the dim light. Her skin felt tight, brittle. Her joints moved stiffly, requiring conscious effort. Thought processes felt slower, more deliberate, the frantic edge of human panic smoothed away by an encroaching crystalline calm. The whispers of the structure were louder now, clearer in her isolation. They weren't just temptations, they felt like memories, echoes from the vast network she had briefly touched. Images flashed, the slow dance of glaciers carving continents, the silent fall of millennia of snow, the patient waiting in the deep cold, the intricate beauty of fractal ice formations, the serene permanence of preservation. It presented itself not as monstrous but as logical, inevitable, a refuge from the messy, chaotic heat of life and decay. Join, endure, be preserved. She fought it, clinging to fading human memories, Samir's sacrifice, Lena's scream, Thorn's awe, Ben's initial pragmatic warmth. She focused on the physical pain of her wounds, the grating presence of the shard, using discomfort as an anchor to her humanity. But the anchor was dragging. Inside the operations module, lights occasionally flickered across the windows. She imagined Gregor, Haynes, and Petrovic inside, huddled around a heater, weapons close at hand, casting fearful glances towards the figure packing slowly outside their door. Were they waiting for her to freeze or to change? Which outcome did they fear more? Her packing wasn't just for warmth. It was a struggle against the encroaching stiffness, a refusal to become the ice statue the parasite desired. Each step was a victory, each breath drawn into protesting lungs a defiance. Sometime during the deepest part of the night she noticed a change. The shard's pulsing lessened, the insistent cold receding slightly. The whispers faded. Confused, she stopped packing, straining her senses. The air felt different, fractionally warmer. The wind carried a new scent, damp, earthy. She looked up. The cloud cover seemed thinner, a few faint stars piercing the gloom, and far on the northern horizon an almost imperceptible brightening, a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness. Dawn. No, too soon. It was something else. A low, deep rumble vibrated through the ice beneath her feet, different from the sharp cracks of settling ice or the groans of the glacier. This was deeper, more powerful, coming from the bedrock miles below. The Chinook. Rescue hadn't arrived, but the thaw had. Kenji's desperate gamble, the emergency melt protocols combined with the glacier's inherent instability and the massive energy discharges from the cavern below. It had triggered a significant geothermal event. The glacier wasn't just melting from the surface down. It was being attacked from below, its frozen heart warming, destabilizing at an accelerated, catastrophic rate. The ground trembled again more strongly. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ice field around her. Steam began to vent from fissures near the borehole structure, melting the snow in hissing clouds. The entire landscape felt fragile, ready to shatter. The door to the operations module burst open. Gregor, Haynes, and Petrovic stumbled out, faces pale with alarm. "What the hell is that?" Haynes yelled over the rising rumble. "Earthquake." "It's the melt," Key shouted back, her voice raspy but clear. "Kenji triggered it. The whole glacier is destabilizing." They stared at her, then at the steaming fissures, the trembling ice. The immediate threat wasn't Key anymore. It was the ground falling apart beneath their feet. "The snowmobiles," Gregor yelled, pointing. "Get to the snowmobiles." They scrambled towards the parked vehicles, fumbling with keys and engine starters in their panic. Key hesitated. Join them? Would they even let her near? The decision was made for her. A massive fissure ripped open directly between her and the operations module, separating her from the survivors, the crack widening rapidly, venting thick clouds of steam. The ice on her side tilted precariously. She looked back towards the borehole access structure. It was slumping, collapsing inwards as the ice around its foundations melted and fractured. The dead creature lay half submerged in a rapidly forming pool of meltwater. Then she looked down at herself. The spreading crystalline blue seemed less vibrant. The stiffness in her limbs lessened slightly. The shard pulsed weakly, erratically, its cold signature disrupted by the rising ambient temperature, the geothermal heat radiating from the fissures. The structure hated uncontrolled heat, chaos, the melt. It thrived in stability, in predictable cold. This rapid, violent thaw was poison to it. Was this her chance? Could the thaw purge the parasite, or at least weaken it enough for her own system to fight back? The ice lurched again. The fissure widened. She saw Gregor get one snowmobile started, Haynes and Petrovic scrambling onto the other. They gunned the engines, speeding away across the fracturing ice field, heading south, away from the worst of the instability radiating from the borehole area, not even glancing back. Gone. Key was alone again on a rapidly disintegrating island of ice, the glacier groaning its death throes around her. Steam billowed, obscuring visibility. The ground felt like slush beneath her boots. She had to move. Which way? Following the survivors seemed futile, they wouldn't help her. North, towards the coast, towards the faint hope of the Norwegian weather station Gregor mentioned. It was miles away, across treacherous, collapsing terrain. The shard pulsed weakly, a flicker of the old whispers urging preservation, stability, but now it felt panicked, desperate, losing its grip as the environment turned hostile to its very nature. For the first time, Key felt a surge of genuine hope. Maybe she could beat this thing. Maybe the thaw was her salvation, not just her destruction. She looked north again, a vast, uncertain distance. Then she looked down at the final shard, the faint blue glow beneath her skin. It was a part of her now, but maybe not irrevocably. The heat was weakening it. Perhaps she could control it now, harness the cold energy defensively without succumbing to the structure's will. Perhaps the long cold had forged something new within her, a synthesis of human resilience and alien adaptation. Taking a deep breath, ignoring the groaning collapse around her, Key Sharma turned north. She began to walk slowly at first, then with growing confidence across the steaming, fracturing ice. The journey would be perilous, survival uncertain. Rescue might never come. But she was moving, alive, and for the first time since descending into that azure tomb, she felt something other than cold dread or parasitic calm. She felt the heat of defiance. The thaw had begun, both outside and within. The end.